Chapter 3146. Translator. Nayarbo Studio Editor. Nayarbo Studio. We are vermin heavens. I didn't expect so many shocking things to happen in less than half a year. If we weren't standing on the immortal army's starry sky fortress, I definitely wouldn't have believed this. I would have thought that I had met with a liar. Prince Xian is truly a god. So he was the one who did everything. TSK. Not only were the prisoners on the Black Wind released by him in secret, the 10,000 experts of the Federation in the bottom cabin of the Black Mosquito were also saved by Prince Xian. If that wasn't the case, how could His Highness achieve such a stunning feat? He actually rushed to the 11th place on the Heaven leaderboard. We participated in all of this. This is a supreme honor. In the future, when I tell my descendants that I also participated in the Heaven leaderboard's advancement to the 11th place, it would be so glorious. Ayaya. Unbelievable. It's too unbelievable. I didn't expect that in the past half a year. We actually accompanied Prince Xian on a trip to the first universe in the Black Wind's lower cabin. We almost turned the entire Fiend Star Zone upside down. Who in the family would dare to say that I didn't do anything in the future? Yes. Although we didn't do anything or even show up, we must be of great use to His Highness since His Highness kept us. If His Highness was really in danger, we would definitely take action. In a sense, we were backup forces that accompanied His Highness on a trip to the Fiend Star Zone. Yes. The last one is the main point. At that time, there were more than 10,000 prisoners in the Black Wind's lower cabin. Why did His Highness keep us? We are all elites. His Highness deliberately kept us here to nurture us as His direct subordinates. Brothers, we mustn't disappoint His Highness. I am willing to go to the Death Star Zone this time. I am willing to go. Count me in. I am also willing to go. Yi Xian was stunned on the spot when he saw the passionate expressions of these fellows and heard the shocking words that came out of their mouths as if they were taking it for granted. Guihai Dao, on the other hand, did not react. Perhaps he had the same thoughts as the others. He believed that Yi Xian had kept the 1,000 or so experts of the Federation alive for some reason. On the other hand, the wretched mosquito slayer was clearly a sensible person. At this moment, when he heard this group of people coming to a conclusion and labeling themselves as elites of the Federation who were of great use to Prince Xian, he was stunned for a moment before an expression of admiration appeared on his face. His eyes shone brightly as he looked at this person and then at that person. The more he looked at them, the more he found them to be compatible. For a moment he actually felt that they were of the same mind. In the face of Yi Xian's shock, this group of people became even more pleased with themselves. They felt that they were indeed smart and had not let down Prince Xian's expectations. Before Prince Xian could tell them the truth, they had already guessed it. Such a performance was definitely worthy of the word elite. Thus, one of the people craned his neck and howled, "We are elites!" Immediately after, the others seemed to have found a common voice in their hearts. One after another, they all raised their arms and howled, as if they had just been injected with chicken blood. Moreover, the rhythm of their voices was surprisingly harmonious. In less than 10 seconds, the 1,000 or so people's voices converged into one. "We are elites! We are elites!" These thunderous words resounded throughout the command deck of the Victorious Return. In the blink of an eye, every single one of the Stronghold's officers, including Naples, were struck dumb. Every single one of them was dumbstruck. As for Yi Xian, he subconsciously shuddered. When this sentence entered his ears, it was clearly different in tone. It was as if they were howling that classic sentence. "We are pests. We are pests." This was especially so when he saw the wretched mosquito slayer acting as if he had found a soulmate. Very quickly he started to get along well with this group of people. All of them were laughing merrily, and occasionally they would speak passionately. In that instant he felt very uncomfortable, however, since this group of people had already spoken up and were so passionate about it. If they were suddenly attacked now, a few of them might even die on the spot. In order to avoid such a tragedy, Yi Xian could only grit his teeth, pinch his nose, and admit to this matter in the end. It just so happened that he had already made plans to take root in that Death Star field and develop long-term. After all, as mentioned before, the entire Everlasting Dynasty had only managed to obtain about 20 Devouring origins in 10 years. Even so, the dynasty's resident elder, who had brought the Devouring origins back to the Everlasting Star, was overjoyed. From this, it could be seen how difficult it was to obtain this item. That was not a star core origin. With the bloodline of the devouring beasts of stars, Yi Xian could smell it directly with his nose. Since this item was so difficult to obtain, even he could only sigh in disappointment when he oversaw the Death Star field. In this sort of situation, Yi Xian really did need a large number of talents under his command. Since these 1,000-plus elites of the Federation were able to be captured and imprisoned by the Black Wind Fortress of the Demon Scout Legion instead of being killed on the spot, this was enough to prove their value. With the help of these people, it would be more or less helpful for Yi Xian to gain a firm foothold in the Death Star field as soon as possible. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's heart immediately calmed down. The only thing he needed to be wary of now was to not let the wretched Mosquito Slayer get too close to these 1,000 Federation elites. Otherwise, it would be hard to guarantee that they would become a swarm of locusts that would wreak havoc everywhere. However, from the way the wretched old man was acting with these people, it seemed that this matter was going to be a little difficult, and not a small one at that. Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly felt a bit of a headache. In the following month, the entire top-floor command module of the Victorious Return was bustling with activity. The 1,000 Federation elites seemed to be on steroids every day. One moment they would come up with an idea, the next they would come up with a development plan. Often, in the short span of a morning, a large pile of documents and reports would be sent to Yi Xian's desk. If he read them a little slower, he would be buried in them. Although most of them were nonsense and not practical at all, considering that these people were passionate and worthy of praise, Yi Xian did not want to dampen their enthusiasm. Therefore, even when he read the most imaginative documents and reports, he just pinched his nose and felt disgusted. He did not lose his temper or anything. However, it had to be said that there were some truly talented people among these people. At the very least, Yi Xian saw quite a few extremely perfect development documents. Even he admired them. Unknowingly, Yi Xian looked forward to the Death Star field even more. On the last 3 days of the month, the Victorious Return fleet finally entered the Death Star field. Although they were still at the edge, everything that entered Yi Xian's eyes made him instantly stunned. His entire heart turned cold. Chapter 3147. Translator, Transin Editor. Transin Pauper's Paradise. Just as Yi Xian had learned, the domain of death was a desolate, dark, black hole-like region. Although this wasn't a real black hole-like region, as soon as one entered the edge of this region, one would find that the stars in the vast starry river were gone. All the stars in sight had withered and died. None of them emitted any light or heat. As a result, this vast region of the starry river was like a pool of stagnant water. There weren't any energy fluctuations in the starry river, not to mention the spiritual qi in the air. In a word, this region of the starry river was like a real dead land. There was no light, no heat, and no natural energy fluctuations. The only thing that could be seen were the experts who were working hard on the dead stars like laborers. These experts weren't prisoners. They had all come to the domain of death on their own accord. Just like the experts who had gathered in the domain of the buried domain to excavate star core origins. The only difference was that the experts who had gone to the domain of the buried domain were mainly excavating star core origins. Although there were other kinds of mineral deposits, star core origins were the main targets. As for the Starry Sky Masters who appeared in this dead star field, their targets were all kinds of rare and precious minerals. A star had completely withered and died. The light and heat in the core of the star had been completely burned away, leaving behind only a black skeleton-like star. However, inside the star there would be some mineral deposits of essence left. These mineral deposits had experienced the life and death of the star, from emitting light and heat, and then completely withered away, so they had some special effects that other normal stars did not have. This also caused their value to soar by a lot. Usually, if they dug up a little, they could trade it to some weapon refiners or forces that needed it, and they could exchange it for a considerable amount of cultivation resources. Besides, although there were countless stars in the boundless starry river, almost every starry river was ruled by a force. The heavenly river star was right next to the domain of the buried domain. If there were powerhouses from the Milky Way galaxy who did not care about the survival of the Milky Way galaxy and used destructive means to excavate mineral deposits around the Milky Way galaxy, then the Milky Way galaxy's federal garrison would not sit idly by. Therefore, even in the domain of the buried domain, the experts who were excavating star core origins wouldn't use destructive means to excavate. Most of them would just drill a shaft that led to a dying star and see if there was any star core origin in its core. If there was, they would take it. If there wasn't, they would just leave. Basically, the damage to the star itself wouldn't be too obvious. Even the stars in the domain of the buried domain that were on the verge of death had suffered such a result, not to mention the normal stars in the Starry River star. No one would dare to use destructive means to excavate, which would limit the speed of excavation and the efficiency of mining. However, it was different in the domain of death. No one knew how the domain of death had come into being, but all the stars in this vast area had died. There wasn't even the slightest bit of light or heat in the Starry River. The natural energy that usually drifted in the Starry River didn't exist either. It was as if there was an invisible force that had devoured everything. Some people might have suspected this before. However, no matter whether or not anyone had tried to find out the truth, at least on the surface, no relevant information had ever been disclosed. There was only one thing that everyone knew, and that was that this star field, an extremely vast star field, had completely lost its normal function. The only thing that was left was the last value of mining mineral deposits. Therefore, in this field of death, all the experts in space could excavate as they pleased. If they were certain that a certain valuable mineral deposit was hidden on a certain planet, and if they had the ability to do so, they could gather a few of their friends and work together to directly smash the entire planet into a pile of rubble. Nobody would care about it. However, although this greatly improved the efficiency of excavating mineral deposits and made the operation more convenient, it also inevitably stirred up the entire domain of death into a black smog. Because this domain of death was in the middle of the forces of the third universe of the human race's technology camp and the cultivation camp, both the Immortal Dynasty and the 10 Ultimates Heavenly Palace of the cultivation camp had stationed fleets and high-level officials to guard this place. However, the only purpose of these official forces entering this domain of death was to collect all kinds of mineral deposits, especially source crystals. This purpose alone had already put all their attention into it. Who would care about the destruction of this domain of death? For a long time, because the official forces of the two camps, the 10 Ultimates Heavenly Palace and the Immortal Dynasty, were indifferent to the mining of mineral deposits in this domain of death. They only cared about the results and did not care about the process. As time passed, all the experts who entered this domain of death and dreamed of excavating a piece of source crystal and making a windfall became more and more unscrupulous. This situation had been going on for many years. The entire vast and boundless domain of death had been destroyed, but everyone had long been accustomed to it. No one felt that there was anything wrong with it. It was under this background that Yi Xian came to the domain of death. Everything that entered his eyes from all kinds of things in the distance, it was very difficult to see a few complete stars. Even if there were, they were the type that was incomparably huge and difficult to completely destroy, forcibly blasting them into a pile of starry sky dust. However, even the surface of such giant stars was basically dug up into an unsightly state. Not a single giant star was intact. It was as if a huge heavenly dog had bitten off a piece or a few pieces of it. It was a ghastly sight. In contrast to this desolate and miserable scene, a large number of experts of the starry sky were either standing in the void with their physical bodies, casting various spells and magical abilities, or rummaging through the pieces of rubble of different sizes formed by the destruction of the stars. Or they were squatting in their respective warships, firing cannons at the stars or the larger pieces of the stars. These guys were all covered in dust and grime. A large number of stars and pieces of the stars had been blasted away, causing a cloud of dust to fill the sky. Under such circumstances, it was absolutely a luxury to want to keep one's personal appearance clean and tidy. Therefore, all of the diggers that entered his eyes were in a sorry state. It reminded Yi Xian of some of the gold miners in the black gold mines from his previous life, a group of poor bastards who held on to the dream of getting rich. Regarding all this, Naples obviously did not know. After being stunned for a while, even he could not help but fall into shock, as if he had just been struck by lightning. He muttered to himself, F***CK, can these guys still be considered experts of the starry sky? Since this general was born, I have never seen experts of the starry sky more miserable than this. Chapter 3148. Translator. Neobo Studio Editor. Neobo Studio Elder Suziwan. If one were to consider the entire Death Star field as a whole and draw a line in the middle, then to the east of the border river would be the 10 Ultimate Celestial Palaces' sphere of influence. The 10 Ultimate Celestial Palaces' headquarters in the Death Star field would be in the center of the eastern half of the star field. West of the domain of death would be the sphere of influence of the Immortal Dynasty. The Immortal Dynasty's headquarters in the domain of death would be at the center of the western half of the domain of death. The two sides rarely interacted with each other and only focused on mining, secretly competing to see who would gain more. Yi Xian's enormous fleet had entered from the westernmost part of the domain of death, which was also the border of the Immortal Dynasty's sphere of influence. Such a large fleet, with its main force being high-grade space bastions and intergalactic fortresses, naturally attracted the attention of many as soon as it entered the domain of the western half of the domain of death. However, when the countless mining powerhouses saw the Immortal Dynasty's insignia branded on the ship's hull, they quickly looked away and busied themselves with their own work. Every 10 years there would be a fleet from the Immortal Star coming over for a change of guard, and the supply fleet would come once every 2 years. Therefore, the old foxes who had been in the Death Star field for a long time were basically used to this kind of situation. Although this time's defense fleet seemed to have come a few years earlier, just this point alone was obviously not enough to attract their abnormal attention. After all, everyone knew that the Tenju Celestial Palace and the Everlasting Dynasty were the official forces stationed in this Death Star field, so it was impossible for them to fight. If that really happened, it would be an internal strife of the human race, and no one could bear this responsibility. In fact, even the person in question, Yi Xian, probably didn't realize that not long after his arrival, the 10 Celestial Palaces and the Immortal Dynasty's official forces stationed in the domain of death really did start fighting, causing a huge uproar in the 3 universes. Perhaps Yi Xian couldn't be said to be the initiator of all this, but he was definitely the main instigator. It was also after that incident that the name Prince Xian once again resounded throughout the 3 universes. However, after that incident, when people mentioned Prince Xian's name again, they could only shake their heads and smile bitterly. Most of them would only have strange expressions on their faces. Even after being sent to the domain of death, he was still so restless. It was truly Yi Xian was clearly a lonely firefly in the dark. Wherever he went he was destined to be a draw. All of this was for later. At this moment the entire fleet was deathly silent. Even the 1,000+ elites of the Federation, who had just been released by Yi Xian from the bottom of the Black Wind and were as excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood, were all dumbfounded, looking at the countless figures working hard like miners in the vast starry sky outside. They all subconsciously shivered. They suddenly felt that although they had been locked in the bottom cabin of Black Wind for a year or so, or even a few years, compared to these poor laborers in front of them, they were already very happy. At least they didn't have to work. Although they couldn't cultivate, they could just lie down on the ground and sleep for as long as they wanted. Just like that, in the dead silence, the entire fleet of Triumph entered the domain of death from the western edge of the domain of death and headed toward the eastern domain of death. What they saw along the way was basically the same. It was only when they approached the central area of the western domain of death that they saw more and more dead stars that were still intact. It seemed that although the official forces of the Eternal Dynasty stationed in this domain of death didn't care about other matters and only cared about the amount of minerals they could harvest, the starry sky masters from all directions of the Eternal Dynasty, or rather, the poor miners from the Eternal Dynasty, still sensibly avoided the area where the headquarters of the Eternal Dynasty was stationed in this domain of death. They didn't dare to completely destroy this domain of death. After a full 7 days of normal sailing, the triumphant fleet finally arrived at the central region of the Western Star region. Looking around, it was already extremely quiet. Although the stars in sight still did not have the slightest bit of light or heat, and there was not the slightest fluctuation of energy in the void, at least the hustle and bustle that covered the sky and blocked the air was no longer there. In fact, even if this place was still filled with dust and smoke, it didn't have much of an impact on the headquarters of the Eternal Dynasty stationed in the domain of death. At most it was just a visual flaw. The star where the headquarters of the Eternal Dynasty was located was an incomparably huge star. It wasn't inferior to the extremely rare Eternal Star. Such a gigantic celestial body, like all the other celestial bodies in this star field, had actually walked into the path of death. It was hard to imagine what it had experienced, And what kind of monstrous force could cause such a terrifying celestial body to fall into such a miserable state? A starving camel is still bigger than a horse. This sentence didn't have the slightest meaning when applied to this giant star. It seemed that in this domain of death, where there was no light or heat, all the stars, even the black holes, would completely die under the influence of some kind of force. Seeing all this, Yixian's heart trembled. At this moment, he finally had a clearer understanding of the mystery of this domain of death. At the same time, he had a huge guess in his heart. All this couldn't be related to the origin of devouring, right? Could it be that all the energy, whether it was the natural energy drifting in the void of the galaxy or the internal energy of countless stars, had all been absorbed and plundered by the origin of devouring, that he still didn't know how it was formed, where it was located, and how he should use to explore and discover it? When this thought popped up in his mind, Yixian shuddered. He didn't dare think too much about it. He shook his head and swept his gaze across a vast plain on the huge star in front of him. A huge man-made transparent protective shield of special alloy covered the entire vast plain like a bowl. It was estimated to be close to 10,000 kilometers in size. And this was merely an ordinary plane on a huge planet. From this, one could see how vast this planet was. In the center of the huge transparent protective shield stood a huge city, surrounded by a few other smaller cities. This city was called Old Su City because the headquarters of the everlasting empire stationed in the west of the domain of death was here. The strongest people of the empire who watched over this place were usually the elders of the royal family's Old Su Pavilion. They would change every 10 years. There were several dozen elders in the royal family's Old Su Pavilion, and they would take turns to watch over this city for 10 years. Right now, the last elder of the royal family who had entered Old Su City was called Long Ziwen. Before they set off, Yixian had already asked Uncle Kong about this elder Ziwen after investigating this situation. Chapter 3149. Translator. Exodus Tales Editor. Exodus Tales: A Show of Strength. Although the Victorious Return Fleet had changed the name of the fleet, the Immortal Legion's emblem on the ship had not changed. Therefore, as the fleet arrived, the protective barrier of the Old Man City in the central region of the huge planet in front of them slowly opened. Another fleet of the Immortal Legion drove in from outside the city and directly charged into the starry sky. They didn't even meet Yixian and immediately left. The fleet that was originally stationed at Su Laoxiong City had already stayed in this godforsaken place for 5 whole years. The commander of the fleet was probably sick of it and couldn't wait to sprout wings and leave this place. Yixian didn't care about this. He led the entire fleet and landed below the protective shield of Su Lao City. He observed the entire majestic city and nodded in satisfaction. Not bad. They even made greenery inside the protective shield. There should be a large oxygen generator. The environment is no different from a habitable planet, so it won't be too difficult. As soon as he finished speaking, the protective shield of Su Lao City slowly closed up. This clearly showed that they didn't intend to let Yixian's Victorious Return Fleet enter. Although the speed at which the protective shield closed up was slow, with the fleet's speed, they could all enter the protective shield before it completely closed up. However, since the other side had already expressed their intention to not enter, Yixian couldn't possibly do that. Besides, this kind of base-like majestic city even had a giant protective shield. How could it not have a space defense system? If they forced their way in, once the other side activated the space defense system, Yixian's Victorious Return Fleet would more or less suffer some damage. At that time, the other side would have no one to argue with. The entire fleet was something that Yixian had painstakingly obtained from the Immortal Dynasty. Even if he lost a planet-level warship that was 1,000 meters long, he would still feel heartache. How could he possibly take this risk? Tell the fleet to stop. If we go out, will we meet that old ghost Ziwen? The moment he arrived, he gave us a show of strength. Su Laogu is really awe-inspiring. Yixian's expression immediately turned gloomy. As he spoke, Naples glanced at the communications officer beside him. The latter immediately issued Yixian's order. The entire huge Victorious Return Fleet stopped outside the protective shield of the majestic city and hovered above the majestic city. In the next moment, Yixian walked out of the main passageway of the Victorious Return. Behind him were Ing Tai, the wretched mosquito butcher, and Naples, as well as 2 major general guards. They were all existences whose cultivation bases were at the 9th level of the origin realm, the same level as 8-star Wang Piao and Zuofeng Tai. Currently, there were only a few origin realm experts on Yixian's side. Of course, there was one more person who surpassed the origin realm and could even easily crush a void realm expert. That person was the demon dragon Candle Dragon, who had been captured alive by the headless infant corpse. Although this wasn't a trump card, it wasn't a power that could be used lightly. In addition, Naples and Yingtai were both at the 11th realm of the mystic light realm, while the wretched mosquito butcher was at least at the 12th realm of the void realm. This could be deduced from the fact that D'Air had recognized his identity and evaluated him in front of the immortal sovereign. However, Yixian still didn't know his cultivation base, strength, or true identity. However, after probing the Black Mosquito Star and the Undying Star a few times, Yixian had basically confirmed one thing, and that was that the slave imprint in the source core of this old fellow's brain wasn't as ineffective as it was in the beginning. It should have undergone some sort of mutation, which was why his words and actions were so different from the other demon slaves. It was also because of this confirmation that although Yixian was still a little worried about the wretched mosquito butcher, he was no longer worried about him having ulterior motives. Instead, he was worried that this old fellow would be unreliable and cause him trouble. In essence, it was already different. At this moment, a group of 6 people walked out of the main passageway of the flagship fortress on the victorious return. They didn't use a small patrol ship and just crossed the void with their physical bodies, descending toward the majestic city within the protective shield below. The other party seemed to have the same idea. The protective shield closed until there was only a gap of about 100 meters before stopping. This gap was so wide that even a small private battleship couldn't pass through. Could only pass through people. Although the majestic city only covered an area of about 100 square kilometers, there were still some small satellite cities around it. The entire green gloomy world under the protective shield covered an area of about 10,000 square kilometers. This showed that the immortal sovereign dynasty had put in a lot of effort and painstaking effort to manage this place. With such a large area spanning 10,000 square kilometers, not only was there a protective shield blocking out cosmic rays and cosmic dust, but there was also lush greenery inside. In this vast Death Star region, it was like an oasis in the desert, attracting a large number of experts who entered the Death Star region to stay here. Therefore, after Yixian's group of 6 entered the interior of the protective shield through the 100-meter-long passageway, they looked around and saw that the cities were filled with people moving about. There were even shops, markets, restaurants, and the like. Everything was no different from the scenery on the other ordinary human administrative planets. It was just that the area here was much smaller. In addition, although there were also many figures of the imperial family guards in Beilexiang City, which was surrounded by more than a dozen small cities, compared to the other small cities around it, this place was obviously much more deserted. If the surrounding small cities were to be compared to civilian cities, then this majestic city in the center was obviously the official territory of the immortal sovereign dynasty. Ordinary people would not have the qualifications to enter at will. Every 10 years, the elders of the imperial family would take turns to guard this place. They would make this place seem like a small country outside of the outer realms. Inside the base, which was thousands of miles away, they would actually enclose 100 miles of land as their private territory. It was very impressive. Old 18th, right? Don't forget that you are being sent here. Just as Yixian was sneering in his heart, an old man's voice suddenly came from Beilexiang City. The other party clearly did it on purpose. His voice resounded over the entire base, and could be heard clearly in every corner of the protective shield that spanned 10,000 square kilometers. Obviously, you are being sent here, but you made such a scene. It seems that old thing Long Kong has been working hard for you. Unfortunately, this kind of thing is useless in front of this elder. If you are sent here, then you should be sent here. Otherwise, wouldn't the imperial edict of my elder pavilion be useless? In the void within 1,000,000 square kilometers to the east, you can choose any dead star as your base. My old residence city is not a place for you to enjoy life. Remember, although you are sent here by the imperial family, you still have a duty. You shoulder the important mission of guarding Elder Pavilion City. The sovereign dynasty gave you such a large fleet, but it is not for you to show off your power. If there is any imperial edict in Elder Pavilion City, you must lead the fleet to it immediately. Chapter 3150. Translator. Nyobo Studio Editor. Nyobo Studio. A new broom sweeps clean inside the protective shield, inside and outside the cities. A large number of strong men in the starry sky were looking up at the sky in astonishment. Their gazes were focused on Yi Xian and the other 5 people. They had heard of Prince Xian's name for a long time, but the news of his banishment had not spread to the Death Star field. Therefore, after being stunned for a moment, these strong men in the starry sky began to whisper to each other. Their gazes toward Yi Xian gradually became strange. The legendary Prince Xian was nothing more than this. So what if he was famous in the starfield? He was still scolded like a dog when he met an elder of the imperial family's dorm elder pavilion. This display of strength was obviously intended to make things difficult for him, and it was extremely obvious. Otherwise, why would the strong men in the starry sky, who were thousands of miles away from the dorm elder city, hear it clearly? This was clearly intended to make things difficult for him. Most importantly, the other party was an elder. It was said that this Prince Xian was rumored to have bravely ventured into the first universe alone. It seemed that there were more or less rumors. Now, under the reprimand of Elder Ziwen, he did not even dare to fart. Some of those words were spoken without any intention of lowering their voices. It was obvious that they were spoken with the intention of currying favor with Elder Ziwen. As for the others, although they did lower their voices, in this current situation where the surroundings were deathly silent, anyone would be able to hear them clearly if they were paying attention. At the very least, Yi Xian had heard everything. The anger in his heart had completely erupted from this. This old thing is really not polite. Is he trying to display his strength? This old man is a new broom who sweeps clean. Thinking of this, Yi Xian immediately sneered. He cupped his hands in the direction of the dorm elder city and said, "Long Ziwen, right? I'll respect you as an elder. This prince is only here to greet you. Don't think too highly of yourself. I wouldn't want this dorm elder city even if you offered it to me. Isn't it just a rundown city? This prince can build one myself. It might not be worse than yours. Besides, you just said that this prince was sent here. Since I've been sent here to the Death Star field, I can't return to the imperial court for the rest of my life without an imperial order. Even if I disobey an order, how bad can the situation be? Find someone else to take care of this troublesome dorm elder city's defense. This prince is not interested. As for the fleet I brought, I'm sorry, but you said it yourself. It was Uncle Kong who sent it to me. The dynasty didn't give me any official edict, saying that this fleet is used for defense. Since that's the case, it's this prince's private army. Oh. Federation. And if of the After he finished speaking, Yi Xian cupped his hands once more. He glanced at the dumbfounded Naples and the others behind him and was about to leave. How dare you? Long Ziwen's angry roar came from Dorm Elder City. At the same time, a majestic aura soared into the sky. It was originally invisible, but it instantly turned into a huge palm that covered the sky. It was hundreds of miles wide. In the blink of an eye, it covered the sky. With a flip of the palm, it slammed down on Yi Xian and the others. Form of pressure? That's a cosmic light realm technique. Prince, retreat. Naples was shocked. As he spoke, he grabbed Yi Xian's shoulder. He wanted to pull him behind him, but he didn't move at all. With his mystic light realm cultivation, he couldn't move Yi Xian at all. Naples was stunned for a moment. Only then did he remember that although Prince Xian's cultivation was at the 6th stage, the Nebula realm, in reality, he had even killed mystic light realm experts who were at the same level as him. Prince Xian's true cultivation had always been a mystery, but it was probably not below his. He had taken things for granted when he tried to protect his master in a hurry. Yi Xian naturally didn't have that kind of strength. However, when Naples' right hand touched his shoulder, an equally majestic power that wasn't any weaker than the huge palm in the sky suddenly surged out of his body. How could the current Naples be able to move him? Screech! This power turned into an illusion that was hundreds of thousands of feet tall. It was the energy body demon dragon Candle Dragon that the headless infant corpse had captured alive. Although it was only a wisp of aura released by the headless infant corpse, it was enough to form this enormous demon dragon illusion behind Yi Xian. The original body of the demon dragon, even in its energy form, was hundreds of thousands of feet tall. It definitely wasn't something a cosmic light realm expert could match. Rumble. A thunderous roar instantly resounded from the horizon. The enormous palm formed from the pressure of the cosmic light realm cultivator's cultivation instantly melted like a snowball that had encountered a blazing sun. It collapsed at a rate visible to the naked eye. At the same time, a muffled groan came from Su Laoxiong City. Immediately after, Su Laoxiong exclaimed in shock, "Demon dragon illusion? It's actually Nebula Realm? This definitely isn't your own power. The ancestral dragon pagoda is indeed in your body. It's actually protecting its master?" The old man wasn't stupid. He saw the truth with a single glance. However, he couldn't have known about the existence of the headless infant corpse. Cosmic Light Realm? What kind of realm is that? Elder Ziwen is indeed impressive. A Cosmic Light Realm cultivation base sounds very impressive. Yixian sneered. Although these words were said in the direction of Naples, they were clearly pointed at the mulberry tree and cursed the locust tree. The expressions of the starry sky experts outside the cities below became even more strange. The Black Hole Realm is the 8th Cosmic Light Realm. After the Black Hole Realm is the Origin Realm, Grotto Heaven Realm, Mystic Light Realm, Void Realm, Genesis Realm, Cosmic Light Realm. After that, I don't know. Naples subconsciously raised his head to look at the sky behind Yixian. The demon dragon illusion had disappeared, but his face was still full of shock. He cupped his hands and said, "The Cosmic Light Realm is the 14th Cosmic Realm. After that is the last of the 15 Cosmic Realms, the Cosmic Realm." The first 15 Cosmic Realms? So there are other realms after the Cosmic Realm? And it sounds like there are quite a few of them? Yixian seemed to be interested. He asked as if there was no one else around. It was as if he had completely forgotten about Su Laoxiong City's Su Laoxiong family elder Long Ziwen. This was blatant disregard. However, the people in Su Laoxiong City below fell silent. Although Long Ziwen was strong, he wasn't confident enough to think that he could kill Yixian, who was under the protection of the ancestral dragon pagoda. It was wise for him to remain silent. However, he obviously couldn't let go of today's matter. What an arrogant and domineering old 18th. Good. Chapter 3151. Translator. Nayarbo Studio Editor. Nayarbo Studio. Rise of the Mighty City. You don't have to worry about this. This prince isn't that close to you. Tell me. Yixian sneered. This time he didn't even bother to salute. Before he finished speaking, he had already turned around and led Naples' group of 5 toward the Fortress of Triumph. In the blink of an eye, they entered the fortress. The entire fleet sailed majestically into the distance. However, it wasn't the Eastern Star region that Long Ziwen had indicated, but the Northern Star region. This clearly showed that they had made up their mind to go against him. You point to the east and I'll go north. The old and old were so angry that a few groans could be heard from the mighty city again. The starry sky experts inside and outside the surrounding cities were all shocked. Everyone felt as if they were walking on ice. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. At the same time, Yixian, who had returned to the command cabin on the top floor of the Fortress of Triumph, shook his head helplessly with Naples and the others. After returning, they found that there was actually a celebration party going on inside. It could even be described as thunderous cheers. The soldiers of the Immortal Army under Naples' command naturally wouldn't do such a thing. The ones who were causing trouble were the 1,000 or so Federation elites, who had just been recruited by Yixian. Seeing Yixian return, a group of people immediately surrounded him. They were so excited that all kinds of ideas covered the sky and earth. "Boss, are we going to set up our own sect? That's a good idea. Didn't the Immortal Dynasty grow up step by step like this? Yes. This way, us old buddies will all be credited with founding the empire in the future. This is a grand undertaking that will last for thousands of years. Boss, let's do it." "Shoo, what's wrong with you guys? How can you say something like that so casually? We have to keep a low profile at the beginning of our venture. It's fine if this matter is known only to the insiders. Boss, you haven't built up your power yet. How can we let the Imperial Dynasty know that you have a change of heart?" "That's right. Everything starts from taking over the mountain and becoming the king. We have to strengthen ourselves step by step. Our ultimate goal now is to keep it in mind. We can't reveal Boss's secret. It will affect our grand undertaking in the future. Yi Xian did not dare to get involved in this kind of situation. He gave Naples a wry smile and hurriedly made his way to his cabin. The moment he left, the wretched mosquito slayer waved his arms and shouted loudly. He raised his hand and beckoned the few people who were the most excited in this group of people gathered together. 3 days later, a giant dead star appeared in the void ahead. Although it was not as big as the one in the old Sioux city, it was not far off. What was even rarer was that the surface of this planet was extremely flat. Large expanses of plains were clearly visible, and there were even some traces of decaying plants, indicating that it should have been a planet of life. However, because it was located in this Death Star region like other planets, it had strangely entered a period of death. Its energy had dissipated completely, and it had completely disappeared. That's it. That's where I made a fortune in the Death Star field. It's this planet Victorious Return. After casually naming the planet, Yi Xian's stronghold Victorious Return immediately led the entire fleet towards the surface of planet Victorious Return, occupying the largest plain. Grand and vigorous construction began in an instant. In addition to the numerous battleships, fortresses, and strongholds in the fleet, all kinds of resources and technological equipment were incomparably complete. In addition, Yi Xian brought out the Black Mosquito, Black Wind, and Saint's Demon Scout fortresses. Even the intelligent androids in Lightning Fortress were put to use. The construction of Victorious Return City was practically changing with each passing day. Tens of millions of mosquito beasts and 100,000 void soldiers shone brilliantly in the construction of Victorious Return City. Such a huge amount of fresh troops was something that even Old Sioux City did not have. In addition, the 1,000 or so elites of the Federation covered almost all walks of life. Among them, there were even a few who could be considered to be skilled refiners. As for technological talents, there was no lack of them. With them around, some of the urgently needed equipment were manufactured one after another in a short time. As for the various kinds of iron ores, rare metals, and the like needed to refine the construction alloys, the countless dead stars in the surroundings were all mineral deposits. Yi Xian spread the word that he would buy them at double the price. In addition, they were just some ordinary minerals. The starry sky powerhouses who entered this star field were usually too lazy to collect them, and just threw them into the void like garbage. After hearing the news, a large number of powerhouses flocked over. Under the pouring out of one storage artifact after another, a small half of the plain was almost filled with all kinds of ordinary metals and ores. Following that was the great refined alloy. With the molds designed by more than 1,000 Federation elites, all the refined alloys were directly molded into shape. In the end, they were assembled like building blocks. All that was left was to fuse the interfaces. This greatly shortened the construction time of Victorious Return City. In the end, in less than 3 months, a majestic steel city was quietly erected on the vast plain of planet Victorious Return. Although it was only 1,000 li in circumference, it was still a majestic city located in the center. Around it were more than a dozen slightly smaller cities. Even the starry sky protective shield that enveloped the entire Victorious Return City, with a diameter of 1,000 li, was set up. The only troublesome thing was the greenery inside this 1,000 li majestic city. Fortunately, the interiors of several starry sky fortresses had green belts in the cabins, transplanting some fast-growing plants. After nearly 3 months, the 1,000 li circumference of Victorious Return City was finally covered with eye-catching greenery. At the same time, the scouting teams that Yi Xian had sent out to collect information also returned one after another. The organizational structure of these scouting teams was very complex. They were basically composed of 3,000 li-long stellar-level battleships. In addition to the soldiers of Victorious Return, there were also mosquito beasts, soldiers, and demonkin experts. In addition, all the small stellar-level fortresses under Yi Xian's command were also sent out to patrol the surrounding star fields. Often, the center of the dozen scouting teams would be guarded by a small stellar-level fortress. If any scouting team encountered danger, the small stellar-level fortress in the center would be able to immediately provide assistance. In this way, the safety of the forces under his command was guaranteed. Although the scale of Yi Xian's forces wasn't small, most of them were demonkin, mosquito beasts, and void soldiers. Naples didn't have too many human experts under his command. Any loss of personnel was very difficult for him to bear. In fact, it was the same for the large number of demonkin, mosquito beasts, and void soldiers. Yi Xian had already left the demonkin starfield long ago. The original troops under his command were too few to be replaced. Therefore, it could be said that he spared no effort when it came to the safety of his personnel. In less than 3 months, all the scouting teams returned one after another, collecting a large amount of information. This information was categorized by the professionals under Naples and analyzed by the thousands of Federation elites. In the end, it formed a systematic and detailed report that was delivered to Yi Xian. Chapter 3152. Situation in the starfield. Yi Xian flipped through the encyclopedia about the Dead Star region in his hands and quickly gained a comprehensive understanding of the Dead Star region. There was no need to elaborate on the other information regarding mineral deposits. In the Death Star field, the Death Stars had all kinds of ordinary mineral deposits and rare metals. There had even been epic mineral deposits unearthed in the past. Otherwise, it wouldn't have attracted so many starry sky experts. Supreme grade, legendary, epic, and supreme treasures. These 4 levels could be applied to almost any item in the starry sky environment, whether it was natural minerals, man-made warships, or all kinds of magical equipment produced by refining technology. Even if it was only the size of a fist, one could exchange for a massive amount of cultivation resources. For example, Yi Xian had several cubic meters of level 99 colored planetary core origin. That was a level 99 colored planetary core origin. A single level 99 colored planetary core origin the size of a fist could be exchanged for a massive amount of ordinary planetary core origin. Moreover, it was priceless and even priceless. In addition to this kind of epic grade mineral, this Death Star field also produced Starry Sky Supreme Treasure grade mineral, the so-called Devouring Source Crystal. However, even in the Death Star field, the grade of the Source Crystal Devouring Starry Sky Supreme Treasure was only a guess. Whether it was really a Starry Sky Supreme Treasure had not been officially confirmed by any official. Many of the Starry Sky experts who had flocked to this vast star field, dreaming of mining even one Devouring Source Crystal and making a fortune from it, didn't even know the specific use of this Devouring Source Crystal. Usually, every time a Starry Sky Source Crystal was unearthed, it would immediately be purchased by some mysterious forces, Everlasting Dynasty, 10 Ultimates Heavenly Palace, or other official organizations at a high price. As for what it was used for, none of them knew, nor were they interested in asking. As long as they could dig up the Devouring Source Crystal and use it to exchange for a large amount of cultivation resources, it was enough for them. In addition to the Eternal Dynasty's Old Sioux City, and the 10 Ultimates Heavenly Palace's Black Firmament City in the eastern part of the Domain of Death, there were a large number of other forces that were frequently active in the vast Domain of Death. On the surface, the teams of the various races of the Federation of the Second Universe could be seen from time to time. Among them, there was no lack of Cosmic Light Realm Masters who could contend with Long Ziwen. In the dark, the servants of the Heavens Legacy race and the masters of the 100 races competed for every Devouring Source Crystal that was unearthed. It was said that there were even a few true Heavens Legacy race clansmen guarding this place. Generally speaking, even though this Domain of Death was located in the central region of the Third Universe, between the 10 Empyrean Heavenly Palaces and the Immortal Dynasties, its overall situation was much more complicated than that of the Domain of the Graveyard of Death. Even Yi Xian was surprised by this. In the official base of the 10 Ultimate Celestial Palace, Black Firmament City, there's also a supreme cosmic realm powerhouse overseeing it. This person's name is Huai Dongzi, and he's a vice palace master of the 6th Ultimate Celestial Palace. The 10 Absolute Celestial Palaces have a total of 10 Celestial Palaces. In each Celestial Palace, there is one main and 4 vice palace masters. In general, the Vice Palace Masters are equivalent to the Imperial Elders of our everlasting dynasty. In terms of numbers, there are dozens of Vice Palace Masters and above in the 10 Celestial Palaces of the Cultivation Camp, which is equivalent to the number of Imperial Elders in the Imperial Elders Pavilion. Taking the intelligence booklet from Yi Xian, Naples flipped through it while introducing the details of the major forces in this Domain of Death to Yi Xian. In addition to Huai Dongzi, in the official base of the 10 Empyrean Heavenly Palaces, Black Firmament City, there's another person whose status is equivalent to yours, Your Highness. He's the young palace master of the 6th Ultimate Celestial Palace. It's said that he followed Huai Dongzi to the Domain of Death more than a year ago. He's probably here for the trial. In addition to that, there are also many teams of experts from various races in the Federation of the Second Universe, including the 100 slave races of the Tianji clan, and a team of experts from the Tianji clan who have yet to be specifically confirmed. However, these teams are all mobile and basically change places after a fight. They don't have fixed bases like Black Firmament City and Imperial Elders Pavilion. When they hear that a devouring source crystal has been unearthed, they immediately flock there, threatening, enticing, and using all kinds of methods to compete. At this point, Naples stopped talking. Yi Xian put his hand on his forehead and sighed. Alas, this small domain of death is so complicated. All the forces of the three universes have gathered here, both openly and secretly. Even if only one devouring source crystal has been unearthed, it's like a rotten egg with a rotten shell, attracting a swarm of flies. This situation is really a headache. Cough cough. Your Highness, it seems that we have to get involved in this next. Naples was obviously a little embarrassed by the description of him as a fly that stung a rotten egg. He coughed twice and reminded Yi Xian. It doesn't matter. As long as there are benefits, then so be it. Yi Xian waved his hand indifferently. For the sake of the devouring source crystal, he didn't mind at all. Instead, he even grinned. But even if we have to be flies, we have to be the biggest flies among them. Naples' face turned green when he heard this. Without waiting for him to speak, Yi Xian spoke again. Right now, these guys are competing for the devouring source crystal. It's nothing more than fighting openly and secretly. On the surface, they'll offer a high price to tempt them, or if that doesn't work, they'll secretly rob them. This isn't a problem for us at all. Release the news that Triumph City is officially open. We welcome all the Starry Sky Masters who have a lot of mineral resources to settle in. In addition to the devouring source crystal and some other rare minerals, even if it's some ordinary minerals and useful metals, we'll still buy them. However, the purchase price can only follow the market. As for the devouring source crystal, the purchase price given by Triumph City is 3 times the price of the last source crystal unearthed at the current stage. If it's sold in batches, this price can be doubled. In addition to ordinary cultivation resources such as low-grade star core sources, as long as you can take out the devouring source crystal, we can even provide barter. In terms of cultivation resources, we can even provide level 8 black and level 9 color star core sources. As for other refining resources, we can also provide various Starry Sky Legend and Starry Sky Epic grade ores, odd crystals, and even finished magic weapons. In addition, since Triumph City is newly opened, there will naturally be a big promotion. If you bring the devouring source crystal to trade within a year, all of the above benefits will be doubled. Huh? Aren't these conditions too generous? Are you trying to monopolize? Chapter 3153. Translator. Nayurbo Studio Editor. Nayurbo Studio new big promotion, have you heard? Prince Xian of the Immortal Dynasty is here. He's the only one in the last 10,000 years to enter the top 10 of the heaven list, although he only stayed there for less than 3 seconds. Damn! Brother, you just came out of seclusion, right? Isn't this news from a few months ago? You're only bringing it out now to play to the gallery. It's already outdated. That's right. We've seen the huge Triumph City from afar countless times. How could we not know that Prince Xian has entered the Death Star field? Speaking of which, Prince Xian is indeed better than meeting in person. He dared to go against the dynasty's elders as soon as he arrived. He actually cast aside the responsibility of guarding the old city and established his own faction. In less than 3 months he built a majestic Triumph City. My brother is amazing. What you're saying is nothing. The news I just received is more explosive. Do you know? After Triumph City was built, it's finally going to open for business. They're buying all kinds of mineral resources, even ordinary resources and ores. In terms of devouring origin crystals, they're clearly selling them at 3 times the price of the last one. If you don't want ordinary origin crystals, they're even offering to barter. They're offering large amounts of level 8 black and level 9 color high-end origin crystals. They're rich and overbearing. That's right. This news has been confirmed. In addition to cultivation resources, they're also offering other kinds of resources, including materials and finished artifacts. They're also offering Starfield Legend and Starfield Epic grade. As long as you can take out enough Devouring origin crystals, you'll have everything you want in a trip to Triumph City. These aren't the most explosive news. Haven't you heard? With a wave of his hand, Prince Xian set a new date of 1 year. Within 1 year, all the conditions mentioned above will be tripled. In other words, if the Devouring origin you have can be exchanged for a level 9 9-colored pill according to the high price he offered, you will have 3 level 9 9-colored pills in your hands within the first year. Heavens, this is a tycoon. Is Prince Xian crazy? He's clearly trying to monopolize the Death Star field. Once these conditions are set, the other forces will probably go crazy. So what? Seeing that you're heading towards Victorious Return City, you should be planning to settle down there, right? Prince Xian has spread the word that as long as you have a certain amount of resources in your hands, after completing the transaction, you will have the right to live in Triumph City. Of course, you will have to pay a certain amount of fees every year, but if you can continue the transaction, then this fee will be waived. This is the Milky Way, and even the old dormitory city does not have this kind of preferential treatment. Anyway, this old man has decided that this time, we will go to Triumph City for the transaction. Prince Xian is so generous, this kind of business partner can't be found anywhere else. While they were talking, they could already see a huge planet in front of them. Although the green land on the planet was only 1,000 kilometers in size, all the facilities, including the starry sky barrier, were fully prepared. Moreover, there was a huge fleet docked outside the barrier. There were 3 starry sky fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters, giving people a strong sense of security at a glance. This city was none other than Triumph City. In the entire vast and boundless Death Star field, including the Tenju Heavenly Palace's sphere of influence in the eastern region, the current Triumph City was already famous. It was the 3rd fixed city base in this star field. Following this group of people who had coincidentally gathered together in the starry sky, they quickly headed towards Triumph City. No one noticed that among the crowd, there was a young expert who looked like a thin monkey who had not spoken a single word from beginning to end. Even his eyes were looking left and right, appearing extremely restless. It was only after he followed the crowd into Triumph City's starry sky barrier that the nervous expression on his face slightly relaxed. In Triumph City, Yi Xian followed the practice of the Heavenly River Star Federation's Affairs Platform and set up a Triumph City Affairs Platform. It sounded very grand, but in fact the departments and organizations inside were very simple, with only a few categories. They were divided into ordinary mineral deposits, top-quality mineral deposits, legendary mineral deposits, epic mineral deposits, and supreme mineral deposits. After that, there was also a department for resident applications. The so-called supreme mineral deposits of the starry sky had only been discovered in the Death Star field, and it was a mineral that had not been publicly recognized by the major forces. It was the Devourer source crystal. In other words, starry sky experts who wanted to trade for Devourer source crystals could directly go to the supreme mineral deposit area. At this time, in front of the first few windows, there were some starry sky experts lining up. Even in front of the epic mineral deposit trading window, there were some starry sky experts in 2s and 3s, inquiring about the details of the transaction. It was even more so for the resident applications, with more than a dozen windows lined up with long queues. Only the area for the supreme mineral deposits of the starry sky had no one in front of the 4 windows. At this time, a figure walked over. It was the skinny starry sky expert. His cultivation wasn't very strong, just 3rd order star realm, but he wasn't too weak. He still looked quite nervous, especially when he walked alone to this desolate establishment for the supreme mineral deposits of the starry sky. As a large number of surprised gazes gathered on him, the muscles all over his body seemed to have stiffened, and his whole person was numb. In each of the 4 windows, there was an expert in mineral deposit appraisal from the 1,000+ Federation experts. At this time, in front of the skinny starry sky expert's window, a middle-aged man in his 30s smiled faintly and asked. The skinny starry sky expert was still very nervous. Although his voice was weak, his words instantly stirred up 1,000 waves in the surroundings. I want to trade for Devourer source crystals, but I don't want ordinary cultivation resources. I want 9th order 9 colors. In the Death Star field, the appearance of every Devourer source crystal was destined to cause an uproar and even a bloody storm. An unassuming starry sky expert suddenly said that he had a Devourer source crystal in his hands was unprecedented. Even if there were, they didn't dare to make a sound, lest they be robbed. This person dared to reveal his wealth in public because of Prince Xian's fame and the strength he had displayed. Even so, among the large number of starry sky experts around, there were still some whose eyes lit up. Countless gazes swept over the skinny starry sky expert with unkind intentions. Some of these people were stragglers, occasionally acting as guests to rob others, while others were from various major factions. At this moment, after hearing that the skinny starry sky expert had a Devourer source crystal in his hands, after pondering for a while, many people immediately left quietly. As for Yi Xian, after receiving the news, he hurried over with the wretched mosquito butcher, Ingtai and Naples. Seeing the skinny starry sky expert, Yi Xian bluntly said, This prince's territory. Don't worry, those who dare to rob me are tired of living. Even if the transaction is completed, this prince will guarantee your safety. You can stay in Triumph City as long as you want. In the future, all the starry sky experts who trade for Devourer source crystals will receive this treatment. Well, let's get down to business. How many do you have? 10. Boom. Chapter 3154. Golden-mouthed jade words. 10. Huh? And? The two sentences sounded similar. The first sentence was weakly spoken by the skinny monkey-like master, while vigilantly looking around. The last sentence was repeated by Yi Xian, whose expression had greatly changed, with a face full of shock as confirmation. Only when the skinny monkey-like master nodded weakly again did Yi Xian completely believe what he had just heard. Suddenly a huge wave of surprise surged into his heart, almost causing him to jump up in joy. 3 years of not opening, but opening can eat for 3 years. These words were really well said. As soon as Triumph City opened for business, in the first transaction of devouring source crystals, he had actually encountered such a super big customer. It was like a meat pie falling from the sky, a rain of meat pies almost causing Yi Xian to faint on the spot. It had to be known that in the past 100 years, although devouring source crystals were produced almost every year, it was basically 1 at a time, at most 2 at a time. But even so, it still attracted the attention of the various great forces in the Death Star field, whether in the open or in the dark, to compete for it. But now the heavens had sent a great master who actually said he had 10 devouring source crystals. This was really hard to believe, but Yi Xian did not have the slightest doubt. Why? Who would dare say in public that they had a lot of these things? If so, as soon as they left Triumph City, they would definitely die without a burial place. And if he said so but could not take them out, would Yi Xian let him take refuge in Triumph City? Even a fool wouldn't do such a stupid thing like digging a hole for himself. In other words, this skinny monkey-like starry sky master must have 10 devouring source crystals. 10 of them. It didn't sound like a lot, but hadn't it been mentioned before? There was once an elder from an immortal dynasty who had been stationed in the Death Star field for 10 years, but after returning to the immortal star, he brought back more than 20 devouring source crystals, which caused a sensation at the time. That elder felt that his contribution was huge and even proudly showed off, allowing some of the masters from the dynasty who were not qualified to come into contact with this important resource to see the true face of devouring source crystals. 10 years, more than 20 devour source crystals. And this was the result of a royal elder, representing the everlasting dynasty's official faction in this Death Star region. And now, Yi Xian had only been in the Death Star field for a little more than 3 months, and he had actually obtained 10 of them at once. If this news were to spread to the immortal star, the imperial family elder who had thought that he had made a great contribution would probably vomit blood on the spot. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's breathing quickened. It took him a lot of effort to suppress the urge to rush up and rummage through his pockets. He took a deep breath and slowly said, "Tell me, what do you want? This prince only has 1 sentence. I will guarantee your safety. Resources, you can have them as long as I have them. I want cultivation resources." Perhaps it was because Yi Xian's public guarantee had calmed him down, but the originally nervous expression on the skinny master's face clearly disappeared, replaced by an excited flush. Before Yi Xian could reply, he had already continued, "But I don't want ordinary star core sources, I want high-quality goods, the kind that can help in breaking through the bottle strength barrier." Of course, I also know that although level 99 colored source crystals are only star epic level resources, they have been recognized by the three universes for many years. And although Devour source crystals are known as star treasures, they are only rumors and can't be taken seriously. Plus, star core sources are more practical. I don't even know what these Devour source crystals are used for, so it's useless to keep them. So, according to the current market price, 3 Devour source crystals should be able to exchange for 1 level 99 colored source crystal. I have 10 of them, so you can give me 3 level 99 colored source crystals. As for the extra one, it's a gift from me. Hearing this, there was an uproar again, but none of the Starry Sky Masters felt that such a transaction was inappropriate. What the skinny monkey-like master said was indeed the current market price, and it was no exaggeration to say that even if they took out 3 devouring source crystals, they might not be able to exchange for a single 9th grade 9 colored crystal. After all, this Death Star field did not produce star core sources. Although the major forces had prepared a large number of cultivation resources for Devour source crystals, they did not include level 99 colored source crystals. This kind of thing was rare even on the Immortal Star. No one was stupid enough to exchange one strategic resource for another. There were definitely level 99 color source crystals on the Immortal Star or the Tenju Sky Palaces, but they definitely did not have as many as Yixian did. It would not be a problem at all to throw out a few hundred star core sources. Perhaps this was the fundamental reason why the skinny monkey-like powerhouse had come to Triumph City today. A high-grade star core origin had a huge and obvious effect on breaking through the bottleneck of one's cultivation base. He was only at the star grade realm, so he needed this kind of thing. The countless starry sky powerhouses in the surroundings were in an uproar. Apart from envy and jealousy, there was no other expression on their faces. At the thought that the skinny monkey in front of them would soon possess 3 level 99 colored stones, the eyes of some of the people who had not harbored any evil thoughts gradually flickered. Yixian did not care about any of this. After listening to the skinny master's words, he sighed inwardly. What an adorable fool. However, his face broke into a grin. According to what you said, 10 Devour source crystals for 3 level 99 colored source crystals is acceptable. As soon as these words were spoken, the surroundings were once again in an uproar. However, the skinny monkey-like expert suddenly became nervous. As the person involved, he was naturally the most sensitive existence. The word power that Yixian said gave him a bad premonition. However, the words that followed made his jaw drop. All the starry sky masters around him almost exploded in anger. However, I won't give you 3 level 99 colored source crystals. Yixian grinned and glanced at the pale skinny master. Then he smiled again. Did you forget that this prince said that there would be a big discount every year? All the rare mineral resources will be sold for 3 times the original price. Therefore, this prince will give you 9 level 99 colored source crystals. Wow, 9? Damn. Doesn't that mean that 1 Devour source crystal can be exchanged for 1 level 99 colored source crystal? What the F asterisk CK? He's hit the jackpot. This kid has hit the jackpot. Prince Xian is indeed a genius. Level 99 colored source crystals are strategic resources, even in the hands of great forces. He doesn't take them seriously at all. Bullsh asterisk T, who doesn't take them seriously? He's a man of his word, a man of his word. With your brain, you'll definitely suffer a loss no matter what business you do. Go to hell. All around, countless star masters were in an uproar. There were all kinds of comments. The skinny master was so excited that tears came out of his eyes. 9 level 99 colored source crystals. He had never thought that he would have such a terrifying amount of cultivation resources. With these 9 colored source crystals, if he could walk out of the Death Star region alive, he would be able to take out 2 or 3 9-colored source crystals in the territories of any small country under the 3 great empires of the dynasty. He would be able to exchange them for an administrative planet. This was the rhythm of a meteoric rise. Chapter 3155. A sensitive character, this prince has a lot of grade 9 colored. At this point, Yixian suddenly thought of something and took out 10 jade boxes from his undying world, arranging them in a row in front of him. Then, the 10 jade boxes opened by themselves one after another. Inside each jade box were 3 grade 9-colored star core sources, each the size of an infant's fist, exuding a dazzling light. For a moment, Yixian's face was bathed in 9 colors. In an instant, cries of alarm rang out like a tide from all around. These starry sky masters had never seen grade 9-colored star core sources before, but now 30 of them had suddenly appeared in front of them, so they couldn't help but cry out in shock. Any one of these 30 grade 9-colored star core sources could be exchanged for a large amount of cultivation resources. Even a grade 7 purple star core source could be exchanged for more than 100 pieces. Therefore, the eyes of this group of people almost immediately turned red. Among them, several black hole realm masters and above even began to flicker. If it weren't for the fact that this was Triumph City and there was a huge fleet above the city's protective shield, they would have snatched these star core sources on the spot. As everyone can see, this prince has so many grade 9-colored star cores, not to mention other cultivation resources. So don't think that after completing the transaction with this brother today, the cultivation resources in this prince's hands will be insufficient. Like I said, as long as you have Devour source crystals, I'll give you whatever you want. While speaking, Yixian waved his hand again and put away 9 of the jade boxes, leaving only one floating in front of him. Inside there were 3 grade 9-colored star cores. At this point, the surrounding starry sky masters suddenly realized that he had taken out so many grade 9-colored star cores just to show off his wealth and reassure the people. Many people curled their lips, but there was nothing they could do. At this time Yixian spoke again, looking at the skinny monkey-like man. I can only give you 3 grade 9-colored star cores. Boos immediately sounded from all around. The skinny monkey-like man was startled for a moment before a bitter smile surfaced on his face. 3 pills was originally a normal price. Moreover, there was no supply even if one had the money. Previously, he had only asked for 3 pills. It was just that Yixian had said that within a year, Triumph City would have a big promotion, and that all transaction prices would be tripled. That was why he was so shocked, stunned by the 9th grade 9-colored stones that were about to be in his hands. From the looks of it now, all of this was just wishful thinking. Prince Xian would probably find an excuse to strip him of his right to receive the 3 times the price of the new Zhang discount. Although it didn't matter. It was just that after being pleasantly surprised, he was suddenly disappointed. In his heart he felt a little uncomfortable. This kind of untrustworthy person, the next time there was a chance to devour source crystals, there was no need for him to return to Triumph City. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, Yixian's voice sounded again. As for the other 6, this prince will replace them with other star cores of equivalent value and give them to you. It's not that I'm reluctant to part with the 9 grade 9-colored star cores, but with your current cultivation, it's too much of a waste to directly use them for cultivation. You should save them for when your cultivation is higher in the future and break through the bottle strength barrier. As for the 6 grade 9-colored star cores, this prince will give you 2 grade 4 green star cores, 100 grade 5 red star cores, 100 grade 6 blue star cores, 50 grade 7 purple star cores, and 10 grade 8 black star cores. In terms of value, in fact, these can't compare to the 6 grade 9-colored star cores. After all, the latter has a price but no supply. However, to you, the actual meaning and use of these cores is much greater than the 6 grade 9-colored star cores. With them, you can directly enter seclusion in Triumph City. It doesn't matter even if it takes a few decades. No one will chase you away, and you will have enough cultivation resources. When you come out of seclusion, your cultivation will have increased, and today's matter will gradually be forgotten. Plop! Skinny 7 will never forget Prince's kindness, and will only repay it with his life. Before Yixian could finish speaking, Skinny monkey-like fell to his knees with a plop, tears streaming down his face. All this touched him. In the Death Star field where there was mutual deception, as long as there was enough profit, even companions would stab one in the back. Yet, Yixian, who only had a transactional relationship with him, was so considerate of him. It was really rare. Admittedly, part of the reason why Yixian said this was because he was putting on an act to attract more experts from the starry sky who possessed devouring origin crystals. However, most of it was because of his sincerity. 10 Devourer source crystals were of great significance to him. In Yixian's heart, he was actually quite grateful to this starry sky master who called himself Skinny 7. As for Skinny 7's sincere surrender at this moment, Yixian had not expected it. It could only be said that he had unintentionally planted a willow tree, and it had turned into a shade. As he spoke, Skinny 7 took out an ordinary small space box from his storage magic treasure and handed it to Yixian. Yixian scanned the box with his divine sense, and a look of joy immediately appeared on his face. It was indeed Devourer source crystals, exactly 10 of them. The quantity is correct, exactly 10 of them. Yixian did not want to be seen by others, and immediately stored the small space box in his undying world. At the same time, he waved his hand and took out another small space box, which floated side by side with the previous jade box containing 3 level 99 colored origin crystals. Then this small space box slowly opened, revealing a pile of various star core origins. At the top were 10 level 8 black origin crystals the size of pigeon eggs. The quantity was exactly the same as what Yixian had just said. The surrounding starry sky masters' breathing quickened again. Among this pile of star core origins, the lowest level was level 4 green origin crystals. Moreover, there were already 2 cubic meters of level 4 green origin crystals. There were even 10 level 8 black origin crystals. The rest of the starry sky masters were red, blue, and purple origin crystals. However, to Yixian these star core origins were nothing. They were just a drop in the bucket. In addition to the large amount of star core origins he had excavated in the graveyard domain using the Devourer star bloodline, the Black Mosquito ship and the Black Wind ship that he had obtained later on were even more abundant. Therefore, at this moment, Yixian waved his hand and closed the 2 small space boxes, allowing them to float slowly towards Skinny 7. When they landed in his palm, there was not even the slightest ripple in his eyes. Everything was so normal that he did not take it to heart at all. It was as if he had just given away an ordinary item. As for this, it just so happened to solidify Thin 7's heart. He received the 2 small spatial boxes that fell into his palm, cupped his hands and thanked them. Then he stood behind Yixian and used his actions to express his determination. Chapter 3156. Fishing in muddy water. After completing the transaction, Yixian left Triumph's trading platform with Skinny 7 and returned to Triumph City's main city. Triumph City was composed of 1 main city, 9 satellite cities, and 10 cities, surrounded by 9 satellite cities. All Starry Sky Masters could enter, but those who wanted to stay for a long time had to submit an application to Triumph City's trading platform. Otherwise, they could only stay for 3 days at most before they had to leave. The main city was where Yixian's direct subordinates were stationed. At the center of the main city was an alloy castle, in which Yixian lived. At this time, Yixian and Skinny 7 had just returned from the first floor hall of the alloy castle. Naples Ing Tai Wretched Mosquito Butcher, Gue Hai Dao Li Mosquito Zua Feng Tai, and the other demon slave experts were all present. Triumph City was his territory, so the demon slave experts that Yixian had hidden in the Black Wind and Black Mosquito were all released. They also needed to be tempered and grow. Apart from Gue Hai Dao, Song Qingyu and the other Kiliarchs were also released to take charge of the main city's defense, patrolling, and other tasks. As for the 9 satellite cities outside the main city, they were taken care of by the human experts under Naples. Unearthing 10 Devour source crystals at once. This kind of thing has never happened in the history of the Death Star field. You should know how sensitive you are. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it tugged at the heartstrings of all the large and small forces in the Death Star field. After sitting down, Yixian turned to look at Skinny 7 and said with a faint smile, "But don't worry, as long as Triumph City is still here, no one can touch you. This prince isn't afraid of that old monster in Old Sioux City, so the other forces don't even dare to openly establish a base in this star field, so this prince doesn't need to worry about them. Properly stay in the main city. Whether it's to cultivate in seclusion or to do other things, this prince has promised that you can stay in this Triumph City until you feel confident that you can guarantee your safety after leaving this place. Then you can leave." Skinny 7 cupped his hands and asked with a bitter smile, "Your Highness, don't you want to know where I got these 10 devouring source crystals from?" "I do want to know. To be able to take out 10 devouring source crystals at once, it would be impossible for you not to have made a major discovery." Yixian nodded, not bothering to argue. "However, this secret is extremely important to you, and I'm sure you won't be willing to tell this prince. If this prince insists on knowing and you refuse to speak, the final result can be imagined. As a result, sooner or later, the Starry Sky Masters in the outside world will find out. At that time it will be a loss of credibility, and no one will come to my Triumph City to trade for the devouring source crystals. It can be said to be a loss for a small gain, so there's no point in asking. What if I'm willing to be honest? Hearing that Yixian did not take the initiative to ask him because of this reason, Skinny 7 could not help but be stunned. In the end, he shook his head with a bitter smile. To be honest, the origin of these 10 devouring source crystals is indeed quite secretive. However, for Skinny 7, it was already a stroke of luck that I was able to obtain these 10 crystals. Even if there are other devouring source crystals in that place, Skinny 7 will definitely not have the luck to obtain them again. In addition, thanks to your Highness' generosity, Skinny 7 has obtained a large amount of cultivation resources. Next, I will wholeheartedly cultivate in seclusion. This is the way of the king, and I have no intention of asking for more. This secret should naturally be revealed to your Highness. Speaking up to here, Skinny 7 cupped his hands again. Skinny 7's previous words were sincere. Since your Highness is already Skinny 7's lord, it is only right for Skinny 7 to tell you the truth. Yixian frowned. Needless to say, this temptation was really hard for him to refuse. The devouring source crystals were just too important to him. Seeing that he was silent, Skinny 7 cupped his hands again. Then, he explained in detail how he had obtained the 10 Devour origin crystals. After a short while, Skinny 7, who had explained everything clearly, retreated and was taken away from the central castle by Guihai Dao. He settled down in the main city and cultivated in seclusion. Yixian, Naples, and the other direct descendants stayed in the hall on the first floor of the central castle. Everyone fell into deep thought as they pondered over what Skinny 7 had just said. After a long time, Naples shook his head and smiled bitterly. He sighed and said, "I'm afraid this matter is difficult. I didn't expect Skinny 7 to obtain the 10 devouring source crystals from Black Heaven City, in the eastern region of the Death Star region. He probably didn't have the confidence to return safely to the western region that belongs to the Imperial Dynasty after making a move there. That's why he kept them in his hands until now. But in this way, this information is not very useful to us. If we had known this before he came and completed the transaction with your Highness, we could have secretly infiltrated the eastern region controlled by the Tenju Heavenly Palace. But now we can't. If Skinny 7 stays in Triumph City, the other forces will definitely believe that your Highness has known the secret of him, obtaining the 10 devouring source crystals. And they won't dare to take the risk of entering Triumph City to rob him. So the only way to know where the 10 devouring source crystals were produced is through your Highness. At this moment, I'm afraid that all the big and small forces in the entire starfield, including Oldsu City and Tenju Heavenly Palace's Black Firmament City, are already paying close attention to our Triumph City. Under such circumstances, wanting to quietly slip into the eastern star field is simply impossible. Once our whereabouts are leaked, the forces will know that the 10 devouring source crystals came from the eastern star region. Even if they don't know the specific location near Black Heaven City, it's still extremely disadvantageous for us. At least Black Heaven City, which controls the eastern star region, will definitely obstruct us from entering the star region that belongs to them. Although we can act secretly and sneak in under the disguise of the First Universe's Tianji clan forces, it will be very inconvenient. But in that case, it will be extremely inconvenient for us to do anything. We won't even be able to officially reveal our fleet. We will be greatly restricted. These words were exactly what everyone, including Yixian, was thinking about. At this moment, hearing him say it all out, everyone suddenly looked at each other, speechless. Since we're being watched, we can't eat alone anyway. At worst, we'll just play baccarat and make a fortune together. When the good stuff is unearthed, we'll just have to rely on our own abilities to snatch it. What's there to be conflicted about? Right at this moment, the wretched mosquito slayer at the side suddenly muttered to himself. As he muttered softly, he curled his lips with an indifferent expression on his face. Besides, that place is not a good place. There has to be someone who is going to die. This kind of good thing is naturally to let someone else be the scapegoat. Damn it, the next time you dare to pick your black hairy and smelly feet in front of this prince, I'll immediately chop you up. Yixian rolled his eyes and immediately made a decision. If that's the case, then we'll do the opposite. As the saying goes, it's easier to catch fish when the water is mixed up. This time we'll first mix up the water, then wait for an opportunity to act. Chapter 3157. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The wind and the clouds before the devouring system was rewarded by Yi Xian for killing the ruler of the God realm and successfully walking out of the 9 heavenly stars and upgrading the system to the starry sky level devouring system. His devouring system had activated many complicated subsidiary systems. For example, it could be used to exchange for all kinds of things such as divine weapons, elixirs, martial arts, treasures, puppets, and so on. There was also a forging system that could be used to forge divine weapons and make them more powerful. There was even a bloodline system that allowed Yi Xian to possess the bloodlines of various divine beasts, such as the Sword God bloodline, the War God bloodline, the Immortal Phoenix bloodline, and so on. Each bloodline had a different ability. In addition, there was also a treasure system that could be used to obtain treasures of various abilities by completing missions given by the system. In general, the devouring system could do many things. Although it was only an artificial intelligence system created by the human race's technological pioneer, Xingbo, it had the potential to grow. However, many subsidiary systems of the devouring system required certain conditions to be activated. Before the devouring system was upgraded to the Starry Sky rank devouring system, these conditions required the consumption of the devouring source. After the upgrade, the activation of these subsidiary systems became more complicated. Before the conditions were met, the system would not even give a prompt. For example, when Yi Xian's personal Starry Sky communication system was activated, the system prompt was given when he encountered the fragment of the immortal grade Starry Sky superbrain. Before that, Yi Xian had no idea how to activate the personal Starry Sky communication system. The system did not give any prompt regarding the activation conditions. As for the devouring source, after the system was upgraded to the Starry Sky rank devouring system, it was reduced to a currency for exchange. Of course, this did not mean that the function of the devouring source was weakened. On the contrary, after the system was upgraded to the Starry Sky rank, not only did the function of the devouring source not decrease, it even increased. This was because after the system was upgraded, the items available for exchange in the original system exchange shop were refreshed. It was impossible to enter the Starry Sky realm and exchange for low-level treasures below the Starry Sky rank. That would be too useless. In the refreshed system exchange store, in addition to various treasures, there were even various rare mineral deposits, some precious bloodlines of ferocious Starry Skies beasts, and so on. Compared to the previous exchange store, it was even more attractive. Even Yi Xian, who was currently surrounded by wealth, was especially moved by some of the treasures and the bloodlines of the ferocious beasts. Even some of the rare minerals were the same. If he could exchange for them, he would be able to fuse and refine the battle weapon, the Demon Bloodstar Tear Sword, the battle armor, the indestructible glass armor, and the battleship Dongshu shuttle. At present, these 3 most basic treasures were already at the Starry Sky epic grade. If they were fused and refined again, they would have a chance to enter the Starry Sky supreme grade. Man-made Starry Sky treasures were rare. Treasures like the Rai Di seal were naturally formed in the universe. The only man-made Starry Sky treasure that Yi Xian knew of was the Life Fortress, Long Yi Ro, left behind by Xingbo. If the 3 basic treasures he used to protect himself could all advance to the level of a Starry Sky treasure, then just by relying on them, Yi Xian's overall strength would rise to another level. However, Starry Sky supreme grade treasures were not to be underestimated. It was also for this reason that since these 3 basic treasures were upgraded to the Starry Sky epic grade, Yi Xian had not been able to find a suitable treasure of the same kind to fuse with them again. Most likely, this wish would fall on the system exchange store attached to the devouring system. Some of the treasures and rare minerals in the system exchange store would be a good match. Unfortunately, Yi Xian only had one origin of devouring, which was given to him by the system after his devouring system was upgraded to the Starry Sky level. He had not been willing to use it, nor could he use it. This was because the exchange price of all the treasures in the Starry Sky level system exchange store started at 100 origin of devouring. Some of the top treasures and minerals even required hundreds or even thousands of origin of devouring. Even with the 11 origin of devouring in his hands, it was far from enough. He could not even exchange a single strand of origin of devouring. Because of this, Yi Xian was determined to get the place in Black Sky City that was suspected to have a large number of origin of devouring crystals. No matter what, he could not miss it. Even if it means starting a war with the Tenju Heavenly Palace's Black Sky City in the Death Eastern region, this prince will not hesitate. Clenching his fists, Yi Xian's eyes flashed. At this moment, he had made up his mind. This prince is not afraid of those old monsters in the Immortal Dynasty's resident Elder Pavilion. If they push me to that extent, I will still turn hostile. As for the Tenju Heavenly Palace of the Cultivation Camp, humph. Skinny Seven's attack was 10 devouring origin crystals in one go. When the news spread, the entire Death Starfield was in an uproar. The gazes of all the major forces converged on Triumph City. This was especially so after they found out that Skinny Seven had actually expressed his allegiance to Prince Xian on the spot, and had actually stayed in Triumph City for a long period of time. Furthermore, he had stayed in the main city of Triumph City, one of the 10 guards. This was enough to prove that he had indeed become part of Prince Xian's camp. These upper echelons of the various powers, who were either overtly or covertly paying attention to Triumph City, all realized one fact. That was, the secret behind Skinny Seven's 10 devouring origin crystals had definitely fallen into Prince Xian's hands. In other words, Prince Xian would soon make a move. All the major forces would need to do was to observe in secret and follow him after he made a move. Then they would be able to follow the clues and achieve their final goal. For a time, the entire Death Starfield was in turmoil. Various forces, big and small, arranged for their eyes to be constantly on the Triumph Star and closely observed all the movements. At the same time, they also quickly deployed their manpower and forces, ready to move out at any time to fight for the mysterious place suspected to have a large number of origin of devouring crystals. It was also at this time that an incomparably explosive news suddenly spread. Caught off guard, all the forces, big and small, who were paying attention to Triumph Star were stunned. This was because this news came from Triumph Star, and it was personally said by one of the higher-ups of Prince Xian's direct subordinates. The mysterious place suspected to have a large number of origin of devouring crystals was actually not the Death Western Starfield controlled by the Immortal Dynasty's Old Sioux City, but the Death Eastern Starfield controlled by the Cultivation Faction's 10 Ultimates Heavenly Palace, Black Heaven City. When this news spread, it immediately caused a sensation in the entire Death Starfield, and it was confirmed on the same day. Triumph City issued an official comment, confirming the authenticity of this news. Such an accident caught all the forces, big and small, who were either overtly or covertly paying attention to Triumph City off guard. Before they could react, a large number of Starfield Masters had already rushed from the Death Western Starfield controlled by the Immortal Dynasty's Old Sioux City to the Death Eastern Starfield, controlled by Black Heaven City. They originally thought that this was just a smokescreen by Triumph City. The purpose was to lure away the forces, big and small, who were covetously eyeing Triumph City, so that they could take the opportunity to go to the real target area. Chapter 3158. Black Firmament City. Before the expedition, Yi Xian had stored the Lightning Stronghold, the Black Wind, the Black Mosquito, and the Saint Child into the Undying World within his body. Furthermore, other than leaving behind some necessary forces to guard the main city of Victorious Return, more than 70% of the Mosquito Beasts, soldiers, and other direct forces had all returned to these few strongholds and great fortresses. This was a surprise attack force that would be of great use in the upcoming direct confrontation. After all, the warships that ordinary experts could store into their bodies were usually small private ones. Even if they opened up a storage space in their bodies, it wouldn't be too big. Yi Xian's Undying World was a special case because it had a storage space attached to the Devouring system. Even those above the Mystic Light Realm and Void Realm would only be able to store a large fortress if they had a large interspatial space. Only those who were stronger would be able to store a fortress that was 100,000 meters in diameter. Although it wasn't a secret that Yi Xian had this ability, not many people in the Death Star region knew about it. After all, it took time for some information to be transmitted from the Undying Star to the Death Star region. Apart from this, Yi Xian had left Victorious Return City to lead his troops to the Death Star region. On the surface, the warship he had dispatched was the Victorious Return Fortress. The fleet also consisted of two 50,000-meter-wide fortresses, four 10,000-meter-wide fortresses, and 10 3,000-meter-wide stellar-level warships. As for the 100,000-meter-wide fortress, the Victorious Return Fortress, as well as all the other smaller fortresses and warships, they were all left behind on Victorious Return City to be in charge of defense. As this enormous fleet sailed out of Victorious Return City's protective barrier and headed straight for the Death Star region, the large and small powers that were still hesitating finally completely believed the news that Yi Xian had released. Because the fleet that Yi Xian had left behind at Victorious Return City could no longer be diverted. There was only one fortress left, which was barely enough to protect Victorious Return City. Therefore, this was enough to determine that Yi Xian's fleet was just a diversion. After confirming the authenticity of the news, the large and small powers in the Death Star region immediately began to move. Immediately mobilize Black Heaven City. We must reach there before Triumph City's fleet and gain the geographical advantage. In the dark space, a deep, muffled voice rang out from a pitch-black fortress. Afterwards, the fortress activated a concealment formation and vanished. There were more than 10 battleships of different sizes circling around it. There were small fortresses with a diameter of 50,000 meters and large fortresses with a diameter of 10,000 meters. These battleships were all completely black, and there was a huge Red Bull head painted on the outer walls of the battleships, explaining their origins. This huge fleet was clearly from the Barbarian Bull clan of the Second Universe. The Barbarian Bull clan was also one of the allied clans of the Wanluo Federation. At this moment, following the disappearance of the Barbarian Bull fleet's flagship fortress, the Barbarian Bull clan, all the other large and small battleships in the surrounding space also activated their concealment formations and quietly sped towards the Death Eastern Territory. This was only a microcosm. In fact, almost all the numerous clans of the Federation of the Second Universe had stationed a fleet in the Death Star region. However, because this was not the Second Universe and was not their territory, these fleets of the Federation of the Second Universe did not establish a fixed base like the 10 ultimate celestial palaces in the Immortal Dynasty. This also greatly facilitated their gathering and devouring of source crystals. In general, if they could acquire source crystals, they would. If they could not, these fleets of the Federation of the Fleets would conceal the insignia on the battleship's outer walls and immediately transform into space robbers, brazenly robbing them. Compared to these fleets, which at least dared to openly reveal their tracks before deciding to use force to rob, the fleets of the Tianji clan of the First Universe, which were the most popular in this vast Death Star region, could only conceal their tracks even more. No matter when or where, almost all the battleships of the huge fleet of the Tianji clan of the First Universe had activated their concealment formations, concealing their tracks and acting in secret. This huge fleet was led by 2 starry sky fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters. There were also many other small starry sky fortresses and large fortresses that were 10,000 meters tall. They were formed by the gathering of the hundreds of slave clans from the First Universe. At this moment, this fleet of the Tianji clan from the First Universe was also rapidly rushing towards the Death Eastern Territory. Not long after Yi Xian's Triumph fleet left Triumph City, from the central area of the Death Western Territory, the fleet of the Immortal Dynasty, led by a starry sky fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters, also sailed out of Grand Old City and rushed towards the Death Eastern Territory. This fleet was not large in number, and it was the private army of Long Ziwen. However, although the size of the fleet was not eye-catching, the commander of this fleet this time was a supreme expert of the 14th realm, the cosmic realm, Long Ziwen himself, of the Immortal Dynasty's imperial family. Therefore, no one dared to underestimate this small fleet that represented the Immortal Dynasty. Long Ziwen alone was enough to take on 2 or 3 starry sky fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters. As all the forces in the Death Starfield, large and small, organized huge fleets to converge in the Death Eastern Starfield, Black Heaven City, which was located in the center of the Death Eastern Starfield, was in an extremely tense state, as if it was facing a formidable enemy. Black Heaven City was different from Grand Old City in the central area of the Death Western Territory. It was the base camp of the human clan of the Third Universe stationed in the Death Eastern Territory. If Grand Old City was a steel city that showed the crystallization of the power of modern science and technology everywhere, then Black Heaven City, which was also built on a huge Death Star, lacked too many technological factors. It was also a huge and majestic city, but it was shrouded in a vast black fog all year round, so that when looking at it from a distance in the void, the whole city was like an immortal city in the sky above the ninth heaven. It was only because of this thick fog that seemed like immortal fog that the city was called Black Heaven City. Some people said that Black Heaven City was actually a powerful magic treasure in the shape of a huge city. It was the treasure of one of the 10 Jew celestial palaces in the human clan's cultivation camp. It could be big or small at will, and when it needed to be moved, it could be instantly turned small and easily moved to another place by using the treasure control technique. As for whether this saying was true or not, it had never been confirmed. It was just a guess. Compared to the more open human clan's science and technology camp, the 10 Jew celestial palaces, as the supreme overlord of the human clan's cultivation camp, had always been very mysterious. They had little contact with the outside world and were extremely conservative. Chapter 3159. Translator. Nayarbo Studio Editor. Nayarbo Studio Death Star Spin. The 10 Jew celestial palaces had a total of 10 celestial palaces. Each celestial palace had 1 principal and 4 vice principals. The vice principals were equivalent to the imperial elders of the everlasting dynasty. In the official base of the 10 Jew celestial palace, Black Heaven City, there was a supreme master of the cosmic realm. This person was called Huaidongzi, and he was one of the 4 vice principals of the 6th palace. In addition to Huaidongzi, in the official base of the 10 ultimate celestial palace, Black Firmament City, there was another person with a similar status as Prince Xian. He was the young palace master of the 6th palace of the 10 ultimate celestial palace, and he had followed Huaidongzi to the Death Star Field to train more than a year ago. This person was called Tianquanzi, and his cultivation was not weak. He was already a rank 7 black hole realm existence. Tianquanzi was only at the black hole realm, and he was only the young palace master of the 6th absolute palace. There was still a certain gap between him and the vice palace master of the 6th absolute palace, Huaidongzi. Needless to say, the latter was a supreme existence at the cosmic light realm, the 14th great realm. It was reasonable to say that Tianquanzi should be respectful in front of Huaidongzi, but in fact this was not the case. It was extremely strange. At this moment, in the central main city of Black Heaven City, Tianquanzi sat alone in the seat of honor. Although Huaidongzi was also sitting, he was clearly sitting to the side. Tianquanzi's face was extremely cold and arrogant, while Huaidongzi was very careful, as if he was willing to be a subordinate. This scene was not only invisible to outsiders, but also unknown to the experts of the 10 Jew celestial palace camp in Black Heaven City. In front of others, the two acted normal, and everything was done with Huaidongzi in charge. Only in private would Tianquanzi reveal his true identity and status. Obviously, it was extremely extraordinary. At least, it had surpassed the vice principal of the 6th palace. It was extremely mysterious. Damn Long Xian, what is he trying to do? Tianquanzi obviously saw the abnormality in Yi Xian's actions and was furious. All the big and small forces in the entire Death Star field were swarming in the direction of Black Heaven City. It was impossible for him and Huaidongzi not to be nervous. The fleet of the Immortal Dynasty led by Long Ziwen of Old Su City was not so bad. Although the human race's cultivation camp and the science and technology camp were competitors, they were still of the same race and would not fall out over benefits. After all, they were in the starry space now. In addition to the human race, there were many alien races from the 2nd universe and the Tianji race from the 1st universe. If he really did that, others would be laughing at him. But it was hard to say about the alien fleets in the 2nd universe. Those guys were also extremely powerful. In order to devour the source crystals, the various races in the 2nd universe had stationed their forces there. Those guys were both in the open and in the dark. Once they covered the emblem of the starship, they could immediately turn into space bandits and disappear unpredictably. As for the powerful fleet of the Tianji race, it was obviously more of a headache. All the warships in that fleet had a concealment array activated almost all the time. The technological power of the Tianji race in this regard was even inferior to that of the human race's science and technology camp's Immortal Dynasty. It was also because of this that the powerful fleet of the Tianji race stationed in the Death Star field had never been found and had always been running rampant in the vast Death Star field. And now they were heading straight for the Death Eastern Star field. All of this brought enormous pressure to Tianquanzi and Huaidongzi. Although Black Heaven City was strong, there were countless fleets of various clans and forces surrounding it. Once Black Heaven City became the target of public criticism, it would most likely fall into a tragic situation. Outnumbered, 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 and outnumbered. That kid is up to no good. Young Palace Master, I'm afraid this matter will be very difficult to resolve. If I'm not mistaken, the secret of the Death Star vortex should have been exposed. At the side, Huaidongzi sighed. That fellow called Skinny 7 obviously obtained the 10 Devour origin crystals by chance at the edge of the Death Star vortex. This secret has definitely been grasped by Long Xian. That guy knew that he was being watched closely by all the major forces, so he couldn't act quietly on his own. That's why he simply mixed up the water and led all the other forces, big and small, to Black Heaven City. He let them take the lead while he hid behind, waiting for an opportunity to fish in troubled waters. We have been tricked by him. As he finished speaking, Huaidongzi glanced at Tianqinzi cautiously once more with reverence. On the other hand, Tianqinzi's expression was completely gloomy at this moment, and his eyes flickered endlessly with a wisp of cold killing intent. The devouring matrix nurtured in the Death Star vortex is extremely important to this venerable. Whether or not this venerable's strongest devouring clone can succeed depends on it. It must not be destroyed. After pondering for a while, a fierce look flashed in Tianqinzi's eyes. He gritted his teeth as if he had made a big decision. Finally, he said, "Prepare to use the universe reversing 5 elements shifting technique. Let the elders of the 6 palaces each take charge of a formation eye. If those guys immediately activate the formation and teleport them all to the core of the 6th palace, this venerable doesn't believe that a few existences of the cosmic light realm can overturn the heavens. In short, this venerable's strongest devouring clone must not be destroyed. It's still in the process of nurturing, so there can't be the slightest mistake." Huaidongzi's eyelids twitched. He naturally understood who Tianqinzi was referring to. Clearly, he was referring to all the big shots of the major forces, including the Old Sioux City's Long Ziwen and the core member of the Tianji clan. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, he couldn't help but ask again, "What about Long Xian? This person is deceitful. Since he has made up his mind to fish in troubled waters, I'm afraid he won't rush to the front in the initial stage. What if he's at the back when the formation is activated and out of the range of the formation? Humph, this guy is scheming. All of this is caused by him. How can this venerable let him go so easily?" The murderous aura surging out of Tianqinzi's body became even stronger. He let out a light snort and continued, "You'll be in charge of this matter. Before the formation is activated, you'll be at the back and force this guy into the formation eye like a dog. You should know that this great technique of reversing heaven and earth and 5 elements shifting is a huge loss to this venerable 6th palace. Several of the important treasures needed to set up the formation eyes may even be lost in the endless void during the shifting process. After paying such a huge price, if I can't solve everything at once, how can I be satisfied? But this is also good. After this matter, the entire Death Star region should be at peace for a while. Before the follow-up investigation by the Everlasting Dynasty, the various races of the Second Universe, and the Tianji clan arrive, this venerable's strongest devouring clone should be able to be nurtured. As long as this venerable stays inside, this venerable's strongest devouring clone will be complete, and can leave this place in an instant. Chapter 3160. Devouring Avatar. Although the 10 extreme heavenly palaces had dozens of vice palace masters and above, they were basically comparable to the elders in the Residence Elder Pavilion of the Everlasting Dynasty. Their strength and numbers were about the same. However, in the Elder Pavilion, the gap between the top 10 elders of the royal family and the bottom 10 elders was actually quite terrifying. The situation in the Tenju Heavenly Palace was the same. The position of the 10 palace masters in the Tenju Heavenly Palace was extremely transcendent. This could be seen from the respectful attitude of the 6th palace's vice palace master, Huaidongzi, in front of Tianqinzi. On the surface, Tianqinzi was the young palace master of the 6th palace, but in reality, he was just an avatar of the 6th palace's palace master, Feng Tianqinzi. As one of the 4 vice palace masters of the 6th palace, he was so respectful before a clone of the palace master. It was obvious how powerful palace master Tianqinzi was. In the 6th palace, Tianqinzi's identity was only known by the 4 vice palace masters and the palace elders, excluding his actual self. In fact, Tianqinzi had many clones. The cultivation technique he practiced was called the incarnation technique, and it was said that he could create hundreds of millions of clones. This might be a bit of an exaggeration, but there was a saying in the Sixth Palace's sphere of influence. Perhaps the shabbily dressed low-level cultivator next to you is one of Palace Master Tian Qianzi's clones. This was enough to show how mysterious Tian Qianzi was. Thousands of years ago, Tian Qianzi had accidentally obtained a piece of Devouring Master Crystal. Since then, he had developed the idea of using it to create a Devouring doppelganger. If he wanted to create a complete Devouring avatar with this Devouring source crystal, he would need to use the avatar technique to split a strand of his soul and place it in it. From then on, he would become the strongest Devouring avatar. Not only would it take a long time, but the amount of energy he would need to devour could be said to be tremendous. An entire region of stars would be destroyed because of this. This matter could not be carried out in the galaxy controlled by the Tenju Celestial Palace. The loss of a galaxy was too great, and the Sixth Palace could not bear it. The other 9 palaces of the cultivation camp could not pay such a terrible price for nothing and help him complete this matter. Although the first universe and the second universe were the best choices, they were not the territories of the 10 absolute celestial palaces. Because the entire plan took too long and required thousands of years, there were too many variables in other universes. Therefore, Tian Qianzi finally chose the central domain of Universe 3, a star domain located between the forces of the 10 ultimate celestial palaces and the everlasting dynasty, and planted the prime devouring crystal with a secret cultivation method. Then, with the star where the devouring master crystal was planted as the center point, the invisible devouring effect of the devouring master crystal slowly radiated outwards. Gradually, a large number of stars were invisibly devoured of all their vitality, light, and heat. Even the energy in the void of the universe was silently devoured. This was how the Death Star domain came to be. Now, after thousands of years of development, it had become a vast star domain. The star where the prime devouring crystal was planted in the center of the Death Star domain had long disappeared and turned into a Death Star vortex. In the depths of the Death Star vortex, the prime devouring crystal that Tian Qianzi had produced using a secret cultivation method had grown to the point where it could evolve into a giant crystal egg. It would not be long before it completely matured. At that time, the clone that Tian Qianzi had prepared would absorb all the energy in the physical body and integrate it into the wisp of origin spirit in the physical body. Then, it would enter the giant crystal egg formed by the prime devouring crystal. Then, the strongest prime devouring clone would break out of the egg. This day was originally very close, otherwise Tian Qianzi would not have come to the Death Star domain at this time. With a Cosmic Realm Vice Palace Master overseeing this place, it was enough to keep an eye on the Death Star vortex. According to Tian Qianzi's calculations, the prime devouring clone in the Death Star vortex's egg would mature within a year. However, at such a crucial time, the Death Star vortex had become the target of various forces because of Prince Xian of the Everlasting Empire. It was easy to imagine how much Tian Qianzi hated Yi Xian. However, there was nothing he could do about this. Although the giant crystal egg formed by the prime devouring crystal nurtured the prime devouring clone in the Death Star vortex, its devouring power would spread out like nuclear radiation, leaving behind side effects in the star domain it devoured. The prime devouring crystals that occasionally appeared in the countless stars in the Death Star domain were the result of this side effect. Tian Qianzi could not do anything about this. He could not control it. Therefore, once the prime devouring crystal appeared in the Death Star domain, it would definitely attract the attention of various forces in the 3 universes. Tian Qianzi had long anticipated this situation. Therefore, under the pretense that he was also attracted to this place, he bestowed several precious treasures, all of which were the eyes of the array used to set up the bases of the great technique of reversing heaven and earth 5 elements shifting. Once something happened to the stellar vortex of death, this ancient magical array would be activated, and everything close to the stellar vortex of death would be teleported to the core of the 6th palace of 10 ultimates in the human clan's camp of cultivators, where Tian Qianzi had already set up a killing array. The starry sky experts who were shifted there would be strangled to death immediately. This was to silence them. After Tian Qianzi gave the order, 6 figures immediately rushed out from Black Heaven City toward the Death Star vortex, which was not too far away from Black Heaven City. The reason why Tianqianzi did not set up Black Heaven City next to the Death Star vortex was to avoid exposing himself and arousing suspicion. He did not expect that it would be exposed today. After the 10 prime devouring crystals that were shot out from the Death Star vortex were obtained by Skinny 7, it directly led to this result. These 6 figures were the 6 elders of the 6th Palace of 10 Ultimates. Tianqianzi had stationed the 6 elders here for many years, and each of them was bestowed with a secret treasure as the base of the array. The 6 secret treasures included the 9 Heavens and 10 Earths Demon-Repelling Divine Shuttle, and the Celestial Positioning Shuttle, which were rare treasures even in the human cultivation camp. They were personally refined by the seniors of the cultivation camp and passed down from generation to generation in the 6th Palace of 10 Ultimates. Among them, the 9 Heavens and 10 Earths Demon-Repelling Divine Shuttle was made from the 1,000-year-old fine iron in the deep cold abyss and the 10,000-year-old ice in the North Pole. It did not use any pure yang qi and was shaped like a woven cloth shuttle. There were a total of 91 shuttles, and they could be used anywhere in the world and were impervious to all evils. Without this object, it was impossible to break through the void. The Celestial Arcane Demon Black Shuttle was a black shuttle-shaped secret treasure that was about a foot long. Once it was activated, the sun, moon, and stars in the heavens would all be affected, and it could blast out poisonous flames and astral winds in the sky. With this shuttle, when the Heaven and Earth Reversal 5 Elements Great Teleportation Technique was launched, it could instantly lock onto the core area of the 6th Palace of 10 Ultimates and accurately teleport the target of this technique to it. Chapter 3161. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio Boom. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. The Death Star Vortex was located in the void millions of miles away from Black Heaven City. It looked like a black hole, but it was only about 10,000 kilometers in diameter. No one knew what was in its depths except for Tianqianzi. Since the formation of the Death Star Vortex, only Tianqianzi's original body had entered it, but only once. The entire Death Stellar Vortex had been rotating slowly. However, this rotation was too slow, much slower than the rotation of a celestial body. It was impossible to detect it at all. The black hole-like void with a diameter of 10,000 kilometers slowly rotated on its own, and after thousands of years, it gradually formed an invisible and terrifying suction force that turned into a kind of devouring force. It radiated further and further, devouring all the energy in the void of this star field, as well as the vitality, light, and heat of all the stars. At this moment, the 6 elders of the 6th Palace of 10 Ultimates from Black Heaven City had used a secret technique to conceal everything after setting up the array base in the void around the Death Star Vortex. Not even the slightest bit of aura was released, but the void 100,000 kilometers away from the Death Star Vortex had quietly turned into a land of evil. Once the array was activated, all the people and objects in this area would be instantly transported to the monstrous killing array of the 6th Palace of 10 Ultimates. No one knew about this. Among the fleets of various forces that came from all directions in the Death Star field, Yixian's victorious return fleet was the first to set off, and they came directly, unlike the fleets of the other forces, who had to constantly monitor the direction of the victorious return fleet and change their direction at any time. Therefore, the victorious return fleet was the first to arrive at the Death Star Vortex. With the arrival of the victorious return fleet, the news spread, and the fleets of the other forces that followed them from all directions finally knew where their final destination was. In an instant, they started to move at full speed, one after another, without any scruples. Is this the place? A few months ago, some crystals were shot out from the inside. Among them, there were actually 10 devouring origin crystals. That brat, Skinny 7, was lucky enough to look from afar and collect them. At this time, the victorious return fleet had stopped in the void of the galaxy tens of thousands of kilometers away from the Death Star Vortex. In the command cabin on the top floor of the flagship Victorious Return, Yixian observed the Death Star Vortex in front of him through the huge holographic virtual screen in front of him. He had a strange feeling in his heart. He found it hard to imagine that a place that looked like a small black hole on the surface could produce a starry sky treasure crystal, like the devouring source crystal. If even such a thing could be casually sputtered out like trash, then what kind of scene would it be inside? Of course, great benefits also meant great danger. Therefore, even though Yixian was the first to arrive, he did not act rashly. At least Black Cloud City, which was not too far away from here, had allowed it to exist without exploring it. This alone was enough to make people suspicious. Yi Xian's plan was still the same as before. When the fleets of the other forces arrived, he would let them be the first to suffer the consequences. Before the fleets of the other forces arrived, Yi Xian activated the Black Mosquito, the Black Wind, and the Holy Sun Scout fortresses, as well as the Thunder Fortress. He ordered them to activate the concealment formation and retreated to the distance of the void. Yi Xian's movements were very fast. In addition, in the void of millions of miles away, no aura of any existence could be detected. Therefore, he thought that all of this was done secretly. However, he did not know that the 6 elders of the 6th Palace of the 10 Ultimates, who had concealed their auras with a secret technique, had seen everything and reported it to Black Cloud City through the special communication method of the 10 Ultimates Celestial Palace. At this point, the undying world in Yi Xian's body was only left with a small private warship, the Dongshu Shuttle, and the Life Fortress, the Wild Dragon Fortress, which was evolving into a 10,000-meter-tall fortress and was not far away. As for the Triumph Fortress, which he brought with him this time, there were 2 small cosmic-level fortresses with a diameter of 50,000 meters, 4 large fortresses with a diameter of 10,000 meters, and 10 stellar-level warships with a diameter of 3,000 meters. A total of 17 warships, fortresses, and fortresses of various sizes formed a formation and hovered in the void without activating the concealment formation. It was meaningless. When this fleet sailed out of Triumph Star, it had been closely watched by all parties. Not long after, in the distant void, the silhouettes of fleets appeared one after another. Even the fleet from Old Sioux City had arrived. However, other than the fleet from Old Sioux City, which represented the Immortal Dynasty, there were dozens of fleets. Not only were the number of warships formed, but the colors of the ships were also different. However, on the outer walls of the ships, the unique emblems of their clans were all concealed. These were only the forces that had arrived openly without activating the concealment formation. In fact, in the surrounding void, there were clearly some fleets that had concealed their traces and quietly arrived. At the very least, the fleet of the Heavenly Fate race would not easily reveal itself, even if the Heavenly Fate race's emblems were concealed on the outer walls of the ships. Those who should have arrived are probably all here. Those who haven't should have activated the concealment formation and are lying in wait nearby. The giant holographic virtual screen in the command cabin on the top floor of Triumph Star slowly changed its perspective. Yi Xian's line of sight moved along with it. Soon all the fleets were in his field of vision. What made him a little depressed was that these fleets had clearly guessed his plan. At this moment, just like the fleet of Triumph Star, they had all stopped in the void tens of thousands of kilometers away from the Death Star vortex, surrounding it so tightly that not even a drop of water could leak through. However, none of the fleets acted rashly. Obviously, none of them wanted to be the first to step into this minefield of unknown danger. Unfortunately, this prince had already anticipated this situation. This time, leading you to the Black Firmament Star region was not a scheme, but an overt one. While muttering to himself, Yi Xian grinned. Before he set off, he had indeed used the deduction and calculation ability of the Devouring system to perform the best possible deduction of this Death Star vortex under the current conditions. He dared not say that he had completely understood its mysteries, but he could say that he had more or less understood it. Therefore, Yi Xian was very confident. He also knew what he had to do next to make the fleets of the various forces, who had maintained a restrained and observing state, quickly move forward to help him cross the minefield and figure out the core mysteries that even the Devouring system could not deduce. With this goal in mind, under the gazes of tens of fleets of various forces, the main cannon of Triumph Star Vortex, the Death Ray Cannon, began to rapidly recharge. Before the experts of various forces could recover from their shock, Yi Xian's voice, which had been deliberately amplified by Triumph Star Vortex, suddenly resounded in the void. Target the Death Star Vortex in front. Immediately, blast it for this prince. The surrounding void was instantly in an uproar. Chapter 3162. Translator. Nayarbo Studio Editor. Nayarbo Studio. Everyone's eyes turned red. The diameter of the Death Ray Cannon's black energy beam was 20,000 meters. It was terrifying. No one could predict what would happen when it hit the Death Star vortex, which was similar to a small black hole. After all, the energy beam of the death ray cannon was special. The energy that formed the beam was antimatter. As long as it was not cancelled out, it would continue to exist and move forward with inertia. After all, Tianqinzi was only one of Tianqinzi's doppelgangers. Moreover, this doppelganger was used to enter the devouring doppelganger formed by the devouring source crystal. Therefore, the main focus was on the cultivation of the primordial spirit. The cultivation of the physical body was not very strong. With Tianqinzi's level of cultivation, he could not predict what kind of chain reaction would occur when the death ray cannon's energy beam entered the Death Star vortex. The experts from the other forces were caught off guard and did not have the time to use the artificial intelligence center of the fortress to calculate. Although the death ray cannon of the fortress required 2 to 3 minutes to recharge to its maximum, Yixian had obviously started this process long ago. It was 99% done, leaving the last 1% to recharge. It was just for show. Therefore, in less than 10 seconds after Tianqinzi's words resounded in the vast void, a terrifying black energy beam with a diameter of 20,000 meters shot out from the hull of the fortress. It shot toward the Death Star vortex tens of thousands of kilometers away at an extreme speed. It was only several tens of thousands of kilometers. For the death ray cannon of a universal fortress, it could be considered a close-range shot. This black energy beam hit the center of the death light vortex in less than half a second. At this moment, whether it was the experts in the fleets of the surrounding forces, Tianqinzi and Huaidongzi in the Black Firmament capital, or the 6 elders of the 6th palace of the 10 ultimates who had concealed their presence with the secret technique of the cultivation camp, all of them held their breaths. Their eyes were wide open, and their faces were filled with shock. There was a deathly silence. Only the faint but sharp buzzing sound of the death light cannon's energy beam destroying the void along the way could be heard. Then, an earth-shattering explosion suddenly sounded. Boom! On one side was a pillar of antimatter energy, while on the other side was a vortex of death that devoured all energy, light, and heat like a black hole. As the two gathered together, an extreme burst of energy instantly erupted. This burst was different from normal, and there were no ripples or undulations when the tremendous explosion rang out. The only change was that the vortex of death that resembled a black hole seemed to have deepened because of this. Other than that, there were also faint rays of light that shot out from the death vortex, like tiny water balls that splashed up when raindrops fell into a pool. It was very weak, but there were a lot of them. They were densely packed and spread out in all directions. They were clearly crystals of the same size, only the size of a pigeon's egg. However, their radiance was different and there were all kinds of colors. Different colors represented different attributes, indicating that although these crystals were the subsidiary products of the devouring marrow essence devouring the energy of this star field to strengthen itself, they belonged to different mineral deposits. Among them, some were devouring source crystals. As expected, tens of thousands of crystals shot out in the blink of an eye. At least 10% of them are devouring source crystals. The rest of the crystals are of high grade and are all important mineral deposits. These guys are probably going to collectively go crazy. Looking at the gorgeous scene of a large number of crystals sputtering in front of him, Yixian immediately became excited. All of this was indeed the result of the deduction and analysis of the devouring system. This death vortex was indeed related to the formation of the entire Death Star field. There were a large number of different high-quality mineral crystals in it, and the devouring source crystals were just one of them. When the death ray cannon fired under the violent impact of the energy, some of these crystals spilled out in an instant. These spilled crystals, especially the 10% of them that were devouring source crystals, were Yixian's trump card that made the fleets of various forces look on with red eyes. After confirming that Skinny 7 had obtained 10 devouring origin crystals from this place, all of them could not wait any longer. They could not wait to explore this place immediately. After all, some of them could not even obtain 10 devouring origin crystals even after decades of effort. It was only because Yixian's actions were too strange that they were suspicious, so they temporarily suppressed this impulse and forced themselves to hold back. At this moment, the large number of crystals shooting out from the death vortex in front of them was no different from the straw that broke the camel's back. Everyone's eyes turned red at this moment, and exclamations suddenly sounded from all directions. Oh my God, what am I seeing? Devouring source crystals. So many devouring source crystals. That guy called Scrawny7 really did get those 10 devouring source crystals from here. It should be a small spill that allowed him to obtain 10 crystals. What we are seeing now is a large spill. How many are there? At least 1,000 devouring source crystals. We're rich, we're really rich this time. What are you waiting for? Collect them immediately. Oh my God. There are dozens of devouring source crystals heading straight for us. These are resources that can only be obtained in 100 years, but they actually delivered themselves to us today. Is this the rhythm of a pie falling from the sky? As these exclamations rang out from the warships, all the warships, fortresses, and strongholds that were originally motionless in the void all moved, shooting out beams of absorbing energy. Like a net, they chased after the sputtering crystals in all directions, enveloping them and capturing them. During this process, some of the fleets that had activated concealment formations and hadn't revealed themselves could no longer remain calm. They removed the concealment formations and participated in the capture of the sputtering crystals. However, the huge fleet that belonged to the Tianji clan still didn't show up. In addition, the victorious return fleet under Yi Xian's feet also fell silent after firing the energy beam of the death ray cannon, and didn't do anything else. In less than a minute, the thousands of sputtering crystals were all captured by the beams of absorbing energy and disappeared into the void. Immediately after, the warships of the various forces that had tasted the initial sweetness of the harvest all turned their red eyes toward the death vortex in the star field in front of them. Chapter 3163. Translator, Transin Editor. Transin blowout in the Death Star Zone, only Black Heaven City, which represented the Tenju Celestial Palaces, and Old Su City, which represented the Immortal Dynasty, existed. The other forces, big and small, including the various races of the Federation of the Second Universe, as well as the Overlord of the First Universe, the Tianji clan, and their hundreds of servant clans, did not have any fixed bases in this star zone. They lived in warships all year round, moving around everywhere. Even Old Su City, which represented the Immortal Dynasty, had obtained more than 20 devouring source crystals in 10 years. When the Imperial clan elder who was in charge of guarding Old Su City returned to Immortal City, he was so excited that he wanted to show off. One could imagine how rare the devouring source crystals that the other forces, big and small, could obtain under normal circumstances in the Death Star Zone. This was an extremely rare resource to begin with. Otherwise, after discovering that devouring source crystals could be found here, the major forces of the three planes of the universe wouldn't have flocked to this place like a swarm of bees. It was also for this reason that at this moment, when the large and small forces gathered here, in just 1 minute, obtained the devouring source crystals that they could only obtain in hundreds of years, it was easy to imagine how excited the leaders of these fleets were. With just one shot, more than 10,000 crystals had been blasted out of this Death Star vortex. Not only were they all rare minerals, but there were also more than 1,000 devouring source crystals. Where else could they find such a good thing? If one shot was already so good, then what about 10 or 100 shots? Wouldn't there be a blowout on the spot? As soon as they thought of that exciting scene, the commanders of the fleets of various races in the surrounding void immediately cheered as if they had just been injected with chicken blood. Some of the commanders of the fleets seemed to be afraid that the other fleets would not participate, so they began to broadcast their excited voices through the starry sky loudspeaker system of the flagship of the fleets they were in without any scruples. For a time, all kinds of excited howls resounded in this vast star zone. Those who did not know would think that they had entered a wolf's den. Why are you still in a daze? One shot blasted out more than 1,000 devouring source crystals and countless other rare minerals. There must be a big secret hidden in this Death Star vortex. That's right. Fortunately, they were discovered by us today. Otherwise, wouldn't Black Heaven City have taken advantage of them? The Tenju Celestial Palace is really something. This Death Star vortex is so close to their base, Black Heaven City. How could they not have explored it? Have you never discovered the secret behind it? That's impossible. Even Skinny 7, who originally belonged to the Eternal Dynasty, was just an ant passing by this place. He was lucky enough to pick up 10 devouring origin crystals here. How could Black Heaven City, which is so close to it, not notice its abnormality? In my opinion, they might have stationed a large number of people around the Death Stellar vortex all the time. Whenever there is a small overflow, they will immediately take care of it. If that's the case, Black Heaven City must have obtained countless Devourer source crystals. No wonder all the major forces in this Death Star area are fighting for the Devourer source crystals. But they are the only ones who are so indifferent. After all this time, they have been silently making a fortune. That's not the point. The point is that there are probably more Devourer source crystals in the Death Stellar Vortex, and even more precious minerals. Black Heaven City might have already sent a fleet to explore and excavate. Why should we work so hard outside and only get a dozen Devourer source crystals after hundreds of years? But they can send a fleet into the Death Stellar Vortex to collect them. They don't even leave a bite of the meat soup. How shameless! This is the sign of public anger. Everyone, let's fire together and blast them out. Blast them out. Boom. Rumble. Before they could finish, some of the warships had already opened fire. The Starry Fortress fired the Death Ray cannons, which were black antimatter energy light beams with a diameter of 20,000 meters. For a moment, 6 or 7 of them blasted toward the Death Stellar Vortex from all directions. Among them were a large number of energy light beams fired from the super meteorite cannons and ordinary meteorite cannons from the cosmic level fortresses, the large fortresses with a diameter of 10,000 meters, and even the small fortresses with a diameter of 5,000 meters. The latter was the most abundant, with hundreds of them of different sizes and thicknesses. All of them converged toward the Death Stellar Vortex. The colors of these energy light beams were also different. After all, the warships, fortresses all came from different races. The construction techniques were different, and the driving energy used was also different. This directly led to this result. Hundreds of large and small energy light beams appeared one after another at the same time, all pointing in the same direction. In this dark void with a diameter of tens of thousands of kilometers, it was as if a large energy net had been woven in an instant. It was extremely dazzling and eye-catching. In the face of all this, Tianqinzi and Huaidongzi, who had been paying attention to this star field in Black Heaven City, were already shocked to the core. With so many warships, fortresses firing at the same time, if the Death Stellar Vortex couldn't withstand it and was directly blown to pieces, it would cause the void to collapse. At that time, Tianqianzi's strongest devourer doppelganger, which was still being nurtured inside, would probably die before it could break out of its shell. The situation had reached an extremely critical level. Tianqianzi couldn't care about anything else. His body trembled as he was about to give the order. It was also at this time that the scene on the huge holographic virtual monitoring screen in front of him changed dramatically again. What was displayed on the monitoring screen was the situation around the Death Stellar Vortex. At this moment, as the hundreds to thousands of star cannon energy beams of different sizes shot out and bombarded different locations in the huge Death Stellar Vortex one after another, a series of earth-shattering explosions abruptly rang out. Rumble. Boom. Amidst the huge explosion, the entire Death Star Vortex, which was like a small black hole, was instantly torn apart by more than a dozen small holes that were more than 100 kilometers long. Faintly mottled rays of light were shooting out from the holes, getting closer and closer. Pooh! Pooh pew pew! More than a dozen loud, muffled sounds rang out in succession. From the void cracks that had been blasted open in the Death Stellar Vortex, more than a dozen giant crystal pillars formed by countless crystals instantly shot out like a geyser. After soaring hundreds of kilometers into the sky, they splashed in all directions like water pillars. The only difference was that what splashed were not water droplets, but mottled crystals of different colors. Among them, even if the number of Devourer source crystals was less than 10%, it was already an unimaginably terrifying number. The geyser had finally erupted. At this moment, even Yixian's mouth was wide open. He never expected that there would be such a huge amount of Devourer source crystals in this Death Stellar Vortex. Chapter 3164. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Turbulent Retreat. Heavens. We're really rich this time. At a glance, there are at least hundreds of thousands of devouring source crystals. I've never seen so many in my life. Not to mention seeing it with my own eyes. This old man has never even heard of it. We've really hit the jackpot this time. Not only have you seen and heard of it, I didn't even dare to think about it. This Death Star Vortex is obviously a huge treasure trove of minerals. It's hard to find even in the 3 universes. Damn it, I don't know how many benefits those guys from Black Sky City have gotten from it. Haven't you noticed? Until now they haven't shown up. This is obviously because they have a guilty conscience. They know that they've angered the public, and they've gotten enough benefits so they simply don't show up. Yes, this should be the case. Didn't you see? In the void on the west side, a huge silver fleet has appeared. It's obviously the Tianji fleet from the Tianji clan. With such a huge amount of devouring source crystals appearing like a geyser, even the public enemy, the Tianji clan, couldn't sit still and show up to fight for it. But Black Sky City hasn't arrived yet. This is enough to explain the problem. Whatever, they can run away, but the temple can't. Let's get the benefits in front of us first, then we'll go back and attack Black Sky City together. The Immortal Dynasty was also kept in the dark this time. Black Sky City has eaten all the benefits alone. Presumably, this time they will join forces with us from the second universe and attack the Tenju Celestial Palace. We must make them spit out some. They've deceived us for so long, for thousands of years. It's really too hateful. Everyone, let's do it together. Devouring source crystals is like a sea. Don't just rob. We're all from the Federation. At this time we have to have a sense of teamwork. We can't let the Tianji clan get too many benefits. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh. As these words rang out, beams of light of various sizes appeared from the dozens of fleets around them. Even the Heaven's Legacy race fleet, which was made up of hundreds of warships, fortresses to the west, unleashed a large number of beams of light. In an instant, a large number of rare minerals and origin crystals that were gushing out from the dozens of void rifts in the Death Stellar Vortex were plundered by the beams of light that interweaved like a net of light. It was a lively and crazy scene. For the fleets of various forces that were gathered in the surroundings, this was definitely the happiest moment in hundreds or thousands of years. All the fleets of the various factions, including the Heaven's Legacy race, gradually went crazy from the plundering. Only Yi Xian's victorious return fleet quietly began to retreat at this moment. He knew that these fellows in front of him, who had fallen into a state of ecstasy, would definitely be like him after they became even crazier. They would definitely think of the Death Star Vortex that could spew out such a huge amount of rare minerals and devour origin crystals. Yi Xian's purpose in coming here was only to devour source crystals. Even the current situation of gushing out source crystals had exceeded his greatest expectations. This should have been something to be happy about because it meant that everyone would be happy and reap a great harvest this time. However, Yi Xian had always firmly believed in one principle, and that was that there must be something wrong when something abnormal happened. For this Death Stellar Vortex to be gushing out such a huge amount of origin crystals meant that there must be great treasures inside. And treasures of this level also meant great danger. The reason Yi Xian retreated at this moment was not because he was aware of the danger and was preparing to retreat. He just wanted to increase the safe distance between them a little more. For a Death Stellar Vortex that was more than 10,000 kilometers in size, just keeping a distance of tens of thousands of kilometers from it really made Yi Xian feel uneasy. Moreover, Black Sky City had been sitting in this Death Stellar Vortex for thousands of years. Yi Xian would never believe that they did not know the secrets of the Death Stellar Vortex. However, the people of Black Sky City had not yet appeared, which was also suspicious. Yi Xian quietly retreated at this moment to observe Black Sky City's follow-up measures was also one of the reasons why he did so. As for the great treasure in the Death Stellar Vortex that he had his eyes on, he was not worried at all. The people in front of him, who were already faintly ecstatic, were not a single entity. On the contrary, they were composed of dozens of fleets of almost 100 alien races, and even included the natural enemy of the Wanluo Federation, the Heaven's Legacy race. Even if the great treasure in the Death Stellar Vortex appeared, it was absolutely impossible for any force's fleet to instantly suppress all the other fleets and take the lead in such a short period of time. Since that was the case, Yi Xian had plenty of time to retreat and watch from afar. It would be best if this group of people fought to the death and suffered heavy losses. At that time, it would be better for him to seize the final advantage. That little bastard Long Xian really has a problem. Just as the victorious return fleet was slowly and orderly retreating under Yi Xian's order, in Black Sky City, millions of kilometers away, Tian Chunzi, whose face was already extremely ferocious, was so angry that he laughed. His eyes were fixed on the holographic virtual screen in the main hall, and he gnashed his teeth. All the other fleets are madly competing for the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals that are erupting out of the vortex. Even the always stable and mysterious Tianji fleet can't sit still and show up. But at this moment, he ordered the fleet to retreat. The legendary Prince Xian isn't such a coward. It's obvious that this guy has a bigger plan. He clearly wants to temporarily withdraw from the situation and wait until everything is clear before reaping the benefits of the third party. At this point, the expression on Tian Qinzi's face became more and more ferocious, and even a little crazy. He continued in a hateful voice. Everything that happened today was all because of him. Even if I ordered the activation of the Heaven and Earth Reversal 5 Elements teleportation technique, and moved all the fleets within 100,000 kilometers of the Death Stellar Vortex into the void-killing array that has long been set up in the depths of the Sixth Palace's core, but now that the Death Stellar Vortex has been tossed into such a huge commotion, I'm afraid that even the star regions that are 100,000 kilometers away can clearly see what is happening. The range of the array can only reach 100,000 kilometers at most, and the starry sky masters outside this area will not be affected in the slightest. Even if Black Heaven City pursues with all its might after the event, it is difficult to guarantee that some fish will escape the net in such a vast Death Star region. In other words, the news of this body's strongest devouring avatar being nurtured is likely to be leaked out this time. Damned Long Xian, he actually wants to sit back and reap the benefits after creating such a huge trouble for this body? Ha ha ha. In the end, Tian Qinzi was so angry that he laughed. His entire person seemed to have gone crazy. He immediately roared and used the secret communication technique of the Tenju Celestial Palaces to order the 6 elders of the 6th Palace who were hibernating in the void around the Death Stellar Vortex to activate the Heaven and Earth Reversal 5 Elements teleportation technique. Hee, since you have already entered the game, don't expect to escape unscathed. Little bastard, I will personally send you on your way. Chapter 3165. Translator. Nairobi Studio Editor. Nairobi Studio Intercept Rumble. Whoosh whoosh. The void around the Death Star Vortex was in chaos. All kinds of air-breaking sounds were raging, and countless beams of light were intertwining and flashing. The victorious return stronghold beneath Yi Xian's feet had already brought along 2 other 50,000-meter diameter star-level strongholds, for 10,000-meter diameter star-level battleships, and a total of 17 large and small battleships, fortresses, and strongholds that formed a defensive formation. They floated in the dark void and began to slowly retreat. In other directions around the entire fleet, the 3 Demon Scout fortresses Black Mosquito, Black Wind, and Saint as well as Lightning Fortress had all activated the concealment array and were also slowly retreating. In just a little more than a minute, the entire victorious return fleet was already 60 to 70,000 kilometers away from the edge of the vast Death Stellar Vortex. If they continued to retreat, they would be 100,000 kilometers away in another 2 minutes. But the fleet obviously didn't stop there, and was still slowly retreating. It was also at this moment that a sudden change occurred, and it came from the rear of the fleet's retreat. Boom! A terrifying aura swept over from the distance. A moment ago it was still more than 1,000,000 kilometers away, but in the blink of an eye, it was already close to 100,000 kilometers behind the fleet. A cold, rolling gray air burst out, and 2 figures with their hands behind their backs appeared, hanging on a cloud. They were Tian Qinzi and Huai Dongzi, who had just rushed out of Black Heaven City. A distance of millions of kilometers was actually covered in the blink of an eye. This was clearly because Huai Dongzi had used all his strength, the full speed of a cosmic light realm expert, who was at the 14th Great Realm, had even far surpassed the 10 diameters of the Starry Sky Fortress. All this was unexpected even for Yi Xian. When the 2 figures appeared on the giant holographic virtual screen in the command cabin on the top floor of the victorious return, his expression changed instantly. A thought flashed through his mind, and he subconsciously muttered to himself, Black Heaven City? Huai Dongzi. That young man should be the young palace master of the 6th palace of the 10 absolutes, Tian Qinzi. But why is even Huai Dongzi standing half a step behind him? At the same time, the expression of Naples who stood by his side changed abruptly, and he cried out involuntarily with shock. What terrifying speed! Huai Dongzi has clearly utilized his full strength to rush over at extreme speed. He arrived in such a menacing manner and directly blocked off our path of retreat. What does he intend to do? Your Highness, please use the space jump. I have a bad feeling that something big is going to happen. Boom! Before Naples could finish his words, Huai Dongzi, with a sneer on his face, had already turned his head toward the eastern edge of the fleet. That was where the Holy Sun ship and Lightning Fortress were located. Immediately after, without waiting for Yi Xian to recover from his shock, Huai Dongzi directly raised his hand and punched. There wasn't any shocking aura that rose up, but from a distance of 100,000 kilometers, he silently caused a huge fireball to explode out of thin air in the space where Lightning Fortress and the Saint Child were located, illuminating a large area of space red. The fireball was about 10,000 meters in diameter, and it was clearly the Holy Sun ship that was destroyed by his punch. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. At the same time, he quickly received a notification from the Devouring system in his mind. The personal space communication system attached to the system had just received a message from the Lightning Fortress. The moment before the other party attacked, the central star brain of the Lightning Fortress had quickly analyzed the danger and teleported in advance. Now it was already hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. It was just a punch, but from a distance of 100,000 kilometers, he had easily destroyed a demon scout fortress that was 10,000 meters in diameter. The cultivation of the cosmic light realm expert who was at the 14th great realm was actually this terrifying. Yi Xian's face was ashen. Although there were not many direct demon slaves who had followed him in the beginning on the Holy Sun ship, and even the mosquito beasts and soldiers were not stationed inside, the Holy Sun ship still had 3,000-man demon slave brigades that he had taken in the Black Mosquito tribe later on. In just an instant, he had lost a large fortress and 3,000 demon slaves. Furthermore, the other party's actions had undoubtedly illustrated a problem. That was, the Black Mosquito ship and the other 4 fortresses that had activated their concealment formations were completely defenseless in his eyes. Yi Xian could still accept the destruction of the Holy Sun ship, but if the Black Mosquito ship and the Black Wind ship were destroyed as well, Yi Xian would really go completely crazy. The direct demon slaves who had followed him in the beginning, including the mosquito beasts and the soldiers, were all in these 2 demon fortresses. There was absolutely no room for failure. Naples, after leaving behind a small fortress and all 10 stellar warships, use all your strength to provide cover and bombardment. All other warships under your command immediately jump, including the Black Wind ship and the Black Mosquito ship now. Yi Xian suddenly roared as his figure was exposed. At the same time, he turned his head and swept a glance at Ying Tai. You and Naples evacuate together. This prince will be there in a moment. After saying this, he took a step forward and instantly exited the command cabin on the top floor of the Fortress of Triumph. His figure appeared in the void of death outside the ship. According to his orders, apart from the Black Mosquito ship and the Black Wind ship, the rest of the Triumph fleet, the Fortress of Triumph where Naples and Ying Tai were, and another small stellar warship, as well as the 4 large fortresses with a diameter of 10,000 meters, were to quickly jump and evacuate. As for the sacrifice of bringing up the rear, there was only 1 small fortress and 10 stellar warships, which were definitely not enough to hold back Huai Dongzi. These 11 warships, in addition to the Holy Sun ship that had already been destroyed, were already the limits of what Yi Xian could bear. If they were to suffer any more losses, the defenses of Triumph City would be stretched to the limit. As such, Yi Xian could only take action himself. He even left Ying Tai behind. Facing the supreme existence of the 14th Great Realm, the Cosmic Light Realm, Ying Tai would only be courting death if she went. Only he could rely on the demonic dragon's phantom, the Weeping Soul Bloodhorn, the Thunder Origin Orb, or the Headless Infant's corpse to successfully hold back or even severely injure the enemy while ensuring his own safety. These 4 were currently Yi Xian's strongest trump cards. He could easily achieve this effect by randomly choosing any one of them. As such, Yi Xian was completely fearless. Your Highness! At the same instant that Yi Xian's figure appeared beside him, Naples suddenly cried out in alarm. He couldn't abandon Prince Xian and take the majority of the troops to escape by jumping through space. No matter what, he couldn't do it. What made Naples even more shocked was that at this instant, the wretched mosquito slayer, who had been shrinking his head, suddenly released a terrifying aura that wasn't the slightest bit weaker than Huai Dongzi's. In fact, it was clearly even more powerful. Let's go. You'll only be a burden if you stay. Although the cosmic light realm is strong, with me around, no one can hurt him. Furthermore, he doesn't need it. At this instant, the wretched mosquito slayer had completely changed into a different person. With his hands behind his back, he put on the demeanor of a pretentious expert. He looked into the distant void outside the warship and muttered to himself, "Is that Tianqianzi's aura? So it's actually one of his clones, but it's actually so weak. Interesting." Chapter 3166. Translator. Nayarbo Studio Editor. Nayarbo Studio Mosquito Butcher unleashes its might. Rumble. Boom. As the Saint's ship was blown apart by the punch, a large number of warships in the Victorious Return fleet opened fire at the same time. Except for the death ray cannon in the Victorious Return fortress, which had just fired and was still charging, the other warships, large fortresses, and small fortresses all fired super meteor cannon energy beams at Tianqinzi and Huaidongzi. The death ray cannon may be able to make this sovereign feel a little apprehensive, but this kind of attack is useless against this sovereign. Huaidongzi sneered and spoke again. This time, he did not throw a punch but waved his hand. A series of explosions rang out as 5 or 6 3,000-meter-long stellar warships instantly exploded into terrifying giant fireballs, illuminating the void. At the same time, the Victorious Return fortress and the other large fortresses were also attacked. However, after the Saint's ship was destroyed, all the warships immediately activated their energy shields, so the other large fortresses were unharmed for the time being. Even if the 3,000-meter-long stellar warship's energy shields were fully activated, they could not withstand a blow from a cosmic realm powerhouse. Of course, this was also because Huaidongzi's attack seemed casual, but in fact he was prepared. Even if he did not use his full strength, it was at least quite deliberate. Stop! As a cosmic realm powerhouse, you actually use some weak stellar warships to show off your power. Old thing, don't you feel ashamed? At this time, Yixian had just stepped out of the Victorious Return fortress when he suddenly saw this scene. In the blink of an eye, 6 or 7 stellar warships had been lost, and there were more than 1,000 Neapolitan soldiers on board. Such a loss immediately made his heart twitch, and his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Suddenly he roared, "This prince will meet you. With just you." Before Yixian finished speaking, Huaidongzi was so angry that he laughed. As the palace master of the 6th Absolute Palace, he was really embarrassed to be reprimanded by a Nebula Realm ant right in front of him. This old man knows you have some means and once forced that trash Long Ziwen to retreat in Old Sioux City. However, he has just stepped into the cosmic realm, and this old man is already at the 6th level. Brat, be careful not to cut your tongue. As he spoke, he was still tens of thousands of kilometers away, still looking like he was about to throw a punch at Yixian. At this level, the Misty Translation Studio Editor, Chenzi Dongzi Studio was Editor, Studio Divine and Art Studio. The 6th level realm, what? At this moment, the wretched mosquito slayer stepped out of Fortress Triumph and rolled his eyes. He didn't even look at Huaidongzi. His triangular eyes flickered as he looked at Tianqinzi with a smile. A fierce pressure surged from his body, far surpassing Huaidongzi's. He was definitely not at the same level as Huaidongzi. He was at least a supreme master of the 15th level, the universe realm. At this moment, Tianqinzi, Huaidongzi, and Yixian all subconsciously turned to look. Yixian's body shook as if he had seen a ghost, his mouth wide open. Tianqinzi's expression changed wildly, and his eyes flickered with malice. Huaidongzi exclaimed in shock. "Old man mosquito slayer? Why are you here? Aren't you dead? This is impossible. Dead your sister. You, a mere vice palace master, dare to call this old man by his name?" The wretched mosquito slayer rolled his eyes again, and then his expression darkened. He suddenly shouted, "Scram!" Rumble. Without any warning, a terrifying and majestic spiritual power gushed out from the wretched mosquito slayer's body. In an instant, it whistled and turned into a huge vortex, directly crashing into Tianqinzi and Huaidongzi. Boom! A huge explosion rang out, and the mountain-like gray mist cloud beneath the two of them instantly collapsed. Huaidongzi's lips curled into a smile as his body flew backwards like a kite with a broken string. In the blink of an eye, he was tens of thousands of kilometers away. In stark contrast, Tianqinzi, who was still standing half a step in front of him, did not move at all. However, his face was pale as he clenched his teeth tightly. Although he did not say anything, his eyes were filled with despair. Obviously, the reason why he was not sent flying was not because he was stronger than Huaidongzi, but because the wretched mosquito slayer had deliberately left him behind. This was clearly a sign that he wanted to take care of him properly. Such a majestic attack, but the effect was so precise. One person was sent flying tens of thousands of kilometers, while the other did not move at all. Just this kind of control of power was no small matter, and it caused Yixian's body to tremble violently again. Spiritual storm? Level 9 spiritual power? Who are you? As his body trembled violently, Yixian turned to look at the wretched mosquito slayer and exclaimed in shock. What his opponent had just used was the spiritual power secret technique. Yixian also mastered spiritual storm. Of course, compared to the effect that Yixian had displayed, it was definitely like a firefly competing with the moon. After all, the difference in cultivation strength was obvious. However, he was able to heavily injure a supreme powerhouse of the cosmic light realm with just a spiritual secret technique that couldn't even be considered a divine ability, and sent him flying for several tens of thousands of kilometers. This indirectly proved the wretched mosquito slayer's cultivation level. It definitely far surpassed the cosmic realm, and was at least the supreme existence of the 15th great realm, the universe realm, or even stronger. Even Ying Tai was inferior to an ant in front of him. However, such a powerhouse had called him master for half a year. Just thinking about this made Yixian feel a chill run down his spine. He felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. More importantly, this guy's spiritual power was clearly at level 9, which meant that his spiritual source core had already undergone its 8th transformation and was now a level 9 source core. This was something that Yixian could not accept no matter what. Even the Mad Mosquito Emperor only had a level 8 source core. Legend had it that the first Demon Human Emperor also had a level 8 source core. However, the person in front of him had a level 9 source core. Didn't this mean that he could invade Yixian's mind at any time? The spiritual imprint left behind by the Mad Mosquito Emperor, which had been condensed from level 8 spiritual power, simply could not block the probing of his level 9 spiritual power. Am I not the Mosquito Slayer, Master? That's what that old thing called me. Didn't you hear it? When he met Yixian's gaze, the wretched mosquito slayer's demeanor disappeared in an instant. Instead, he smiled bashfully, his triangular eyes looking extremely wretched. As he spoke, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion toward his forehead. 2 gloomy rays of light rushed out of his head and landed in his palms. He opened them up and showed them to Yixian. Look! These are the 2 spiritual imprints that you planted in my source core one after the other. Am I right? In his palms were the 2 spiritual source cores that Yixian had planted in his head. There was no doubt that they were of different grades. Yixian was completely sure of that aura. More importantly, this kind of spiritual imprint had clearly been lost among the demons. Besides Yixian, no one else would be able to condense it. However, all this proved that the wretched mosquito slayer in front of him was indeed the one he had first met. Why exactly was he still calling him master? Yixian's mind was in a complete mess. When Tianchunzi heard the wretched mosquito slayer call Yixian master, his expression changed abruptly. When he looked at him again, his expression was extremely complicated. Chapter 3167. Death of Tianchunzi. This old man also didn't think that we would actually meet so soon. Although I had predicted that I would meet an old friend in the next few days, I didn't expect it to be you. Moreover, it's only a clone. The wretched mosquito slayer retracted his gaze from Yixian and looked at Tianchunzi. He then raised his hand and pointed at the Death Star vortex behind him. He grinned and said, I can see that although the cultivation of this clone of yours is not high enough, the Yuan spirit that is split is extremely stable. In this situation it should be used for possession, right? From the looks of it, there should be a very powerful clone in the Death Stellar vortex. It's like an infant without any consciousness, and it'll immediately become a new clone of yours as soon as your soul enters it. For you to value it so much, this clone must be very valuable and important. TSK. Tell me, how lucky am I? Although I'm not interested in that clone, according to my calculations, it's not fated to be mine. But just being able to spoil your good deed is already a very good thing for me. Furthermore, according to this old man's calculations, That clone will ultimately benefit my new lord. You're the one who's in charge of this matter. Thank you. Who? Hearing the vulgar words coming out of the mouth of the vulgar mosquito butcher, then looking at his extremely vulgar and extremely shameless face, which clearly belonged to the type of person who wanted to play the victim even after gaining an advantage, Tian Chanzi's complexion turned from white to black, then from black to green, and finally into a purplish color. He was so angry that he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. His spirit instantly weakened by 30%. It was obvious that he had suffered serious internal injuries. Furthermore, his primordial spirit had been injured. This immediately stunned Yixian. He had heard of people who were so angry that they vomited blood, but what kind of ghost was this to injure his own primordial spirit? My lord? Just him? Haha. Raising his hand to wipe away the trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, Tianqinzi laughed wildly with a sinister expression. He glanced at Yixian with a face full of disdain. Don't think that this lord can't see through it. This brat's cultivation is indeed at the first stage of Nebula Realm. He isn't hiding it at all. The so-called Prince Xian's divine sense is nothing more than a hoax. An immortal dynasty, it really makes one speechless. As it happens, even you, mosquito butcher, have fallen into the trap. You've calculated your entire life, and in the end you've actually counted yourself as the servant of a Nebula Realm ant. Ha ha ha. Mosquito butcher, your heaven measuring technique really disappoints me. There's no point in talking too much. We'll find out in the future. What's most important is what's in front of us right now. To be able to ruin one of Tian Qianzi's plans, this old man has gained quite a bit today. Goodbye, old friend. Boom! The wretched mosquito butcher grinned again. His triangular eyes flashed wildly, and in an instant, he looked extremely wretched. Before he finished speaking, a similarly majestic spiritual storm suddenly surged out of his body and instantly enveloped Tian Qinzi. The latter knew that this doppelganger was bound to die, so he actually self-detonated one step ahead of time. With a boom, his entire body suddenly exploded. His voice was like a ghost scream, instantly spreading through the endless void. Array, rise! Little kid, this lord will wait for you in the 6th palace. Haha! Whoosh! At the same time, from the flesh and blood that Tian Qinzi had suddenly self-detonated, a tiny gray light instantly shot out. Even the wretched mosquito butcher's spiritual storm couldn't stop it. In an instant, it crossed hundreds of thousands of kilometers and rushed into the Death Star vortex in the void in front of them in the blink of an eye. It plunged in and disappeared. You still haven't given up? Unfortunately, this old man's heaven measuring technique is definitely not wrong. That doppelganger in the Death Star vortex is not fated to be with you. The wretched mosquito butcher frowned and turned to look in the direction of the Death Star vortex. He curled his lips and sneered. Boom! Boom! Right at this moment, in the void outside the Death Stellar vortex, in 6 different directions, 100,000 kilometers away, an earth-shattering explosion suddenly rang out. From these 6 directions, 6 shocking pillars of energy shot up into the sky, exuding an incomparably dense and ancient aura. At this moment it was as if the sun, moon, and stars in the heavens had all sensed it. In the void within a radius of 100,000 miles, countless poisonous flames and astral winds blasted out from the 6 pillars of energy that shot up into the sky. In an instant, this vast void within a radius of 100,000 kilometers was turned into a prison. The 6 huge energy light pillars were the foundation pillars of the array. After shooting up into the sky, they bloomed and spread out, spreading out into a huge net in the boundless sky. This was the power of the Desolate Era treasure. The 9 heavens and 10 earths demon-repelling divine shuttle. This treasure was forged and tempered with 1,000-year-old fine iron in the deep cold abyss for 10,000 years, and then molded bit by bit with the 10,000-year-old ice of the North Pole. It did not use the slightest bit of pure yang qi. It could go anywhere it wanted and was impervious to all evils. At this moment, when the array was activated, it instantly turned into a total of 91 huge shuttle-shaped magical treasures. They shuttled back and forth between the 6 energy light pillars, leaving behind a trail of energy flames. In less than a breath, the entire void was covered with countless array chains, sealing everything, including Yixian, the wretched mosquito butcher, and the more than 1,000 warships of the dozens of large and small forces in the surrounding void. were all sealed. Only Yi Xian's victorious return fleet, except for the 6 or 7 star-level warships that had been destroyed by Huai Dongzi with a wave of his hand, as well as the Saint ship, had all performed a space jump before the array was activated, escaping to the array area 100,000 kilometers away. At this moment, in the void hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, all the experts in the warships were looking in this direction. All of them were shocked. In the void 100,000 kilometers outside the Death Star vortex, thousands of warships, fortresses, and starry sky fortresses of all sizes had been wiped out. Although they were only trapped and sealed by this huge desolate era strange array, there was no doubt that something bad was going to happen. Everyone knew that something big was going to happen. To play such a big game of chess, Black Heaven City was indeed very generous. The great art of reversing heaven and earth 5 elements shifting. They even used such desolate era treasures as the 9 heavens and 10 earths demon-repelling divine shuttle, and the all heavens mystic demon dark shuttle? What kind of powerful doppelganger is Tian Qianzi nurturing in this Death Star vortex? How could he be so generous as to risk using palace-level desolate era treasures? Seeing this scene, the wretched mosquito butcher's expression changed. As he spoke, he suddenly thought of something and cried out involuntarily, "Oh no, with these 2 desolate era treasures, as soon as the great art of reversing heaven and earth 5 elements shifting is launched, it can instantly lock onto the core area of the 6th palace of the 10 Ultimates 10 palaces and accurately teleport the target of this secret technique to it. There's no mistake. The old man wants to shift everyone in the array area and bring them back to the core area of the 6th palace of the 10 Ultimates 10 palaces to silence them. There must be a void-killing array already set up there. There's only one chance. Quickly rush into the Death Star vortex. Only in this way can you avoid being moved by the array." Chapter 3168. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation The Great Escape Boom. This time, the wretched mosquito slayer used the same mental power secret technique that Yi Xian had mastered, but its power was much more powerful than the mental storm from before. Destruction Vortex. The demon's mental power that surged out of his body was far more powerful than before, and it instantly formed a huge mental power vortex that soared into the sky. In addition to Mosquito Slayer's level 9 mental power, he had reached the peak of the demon's mental power, and its power was unpredictable. In the blink of an eye, a huge gap was created in the cage formed by countless energy beams of different sizes. Unfortunately, this gap did not lead to any other direction, but to the death vortex in front. Obviously, the wretched mosquito slayer still could not forget the strongest devouring doppelganger that Tian Qianzi had secretly nurtured in the death vortex. This time he used the destruction vortex to open a path for Yi Xian, and it was also directed to the death vortex. Yi Xian had no choice but to wave his hand and summon the Dongshu shuttle with a bitter smile. He stepped into it and immediately turned the shuttle into a purple light that rushed into the death vortex. At this moment, the wretched mosquito slayer's figure disappeared in the blink of an eye, but he did not rush into the death vortex in front. Instead, after he rushed out of the void cage and was about to enter the death vortex, he forcefully pulled himself out of it with some great magical power. Then, he suddenly paused and rushed in the direction of the victorious return fleet. Just as the Dongshu shuttle entered the death vortex, his voice was clearly heard. "I've already calculated with the heaven measuring technique. Although Master is going to be in danger, you'll definitely be able to turn the misfortune into a blessing in the end, and you'll also have a great harvest. From now on you'll soar into the sky. Don't worry, I'll be guarding planet Victorious Return. As long as the 10 palace masters of the 10 ultimate celestial palaces don't come in person, you'll be safe." At the same time, the thousands of battleships, fortresses, and strongholds of the dozens of fleets from various forces in the void cage that was 100,000 miles away were in an uproar at this moment. The scene that had occurred in the void tens of thousands of kilometers away was a long story, but in truth, from the moment Huai Dongzi and Tianqinzi appeared to the moment Tianqinzi self-destructed, only half a minute had passed. In such a short period of time, all the masters in the dozens of fleets near the Death Star vortex were originally focused on competing for the rare minerals and source crystals that had erupted from the Death Star vortex, so no one paid attention to what was happening in the distant void. In such a hurry, no one was able to react. It wasn't until Tianqinzi self-detonated and activated the great shifting technique of the 5 elements that all the experts in the starry sky suddenly realized that they had fallen into the trap of Black Heaven City. Unfortunately, the array formation had already been activated. Not all existences had the ability to escape. Before this void cage was fully formed, only 6 starry sky fortresses managed to escape. 5 of them were the flagship fortresses of the 5 large fleets belonging to the various forces of the Federation in the Second Universe. The other one was one of the 2 flagship fortresses of the Heavenly Legacy clan. The rest, including the Celestial Legacy race's other interstellar fortress, and the Celestial Legacy interstellar fortress personally guarded by old-time dragon Ziwen, were all trapped in the void cage formed by the formation. There were still thousands of battleships, fortresses, and strongholds of various sizes. They were so densely packed that it was a shocking sight. Some of the stellar-level battleships, which were 3,000 meters long, had been activated by the great shifting technique of the 5 elements. The moment the great shifting technique of the 5 elements blasted out countless poisonous flames and astral winds from the 6 energy light pillars into the sky, they completely exploded into giant balls of flames. There were at least 200 or 300 of them. All the battleships and fortresses had been preoccupied with fighting for the source crystals, and hadn't even activated their defensive shields. The large fortresses with a diameter of more than 10,000 meters were fine. They could withstand the power of the array formation for a short period of time. Then they could activate their defensive shields. At least they would be fine for the time being. But the stellar-level battleships, which were 3,000 meters long, didn't even have the chance to do so. The moment the array formation was activated, they exploded under the power of the array formation. In an instant, hundreds of huge fireballs exploded in the void of this cage that was 100,000 kilometers in size. Accompanied by the energy pillars of the formation and the light emitted by the rare mineral deposits that erupted, they were extremely dazzling under the contrast of each other. The entire vast void was like a dream. All the experts in the starry sky who had escaped from the void cage and were watching from the center of the void in the distance were dumbfounded and absent-minded. It was also at this moment that the wretched mosquito slayer used the destructive vortex and forcibly blasted a passage through the great shifting technique of the 5 elements, which led directly to the Death Star vortex. Then Yixian's Dongshu shuttle rushed into the vortex. At least, they had left the void cage that was sealed by the great shifting technique of the 5 elements. And if they stayed here, they would be in big trouble. All the experts in the void cage were well aware of this. Therefore, although they were also wary of the Death Star vortex in front of them, at least someone had taken the lead and rushed in. This was the only way out. And compared to this void cage that only had endless dangers waiting to befall them, at least the Death Star vortex in front of them clearly contained a large number of source crystals. They might be able to snatch more if they risked their lives. How could one catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? In an instant, the eyes of all the experts trapped in the void cage turned red. Fortresses and fortresses of various sizes, as well as the surviving stellar-level warships, all scrambled to be the first to leave. In the blink of an eye, several interstellar fortresses followed closely behind Yixian and rushed into the Death Star vortex. Immediately after, a few more cosmic state fortresses charged in. Finally, there were more than 10 large fortresses with diameters of 10,000 meters. In just 5 to 6 seconds, more than 10 warships rushed into the Death Star vortex after the Dongshu shuttle, the smallest of which was a large fortress with a diameter of 10,000 meters. It was also at this moment that the escape tunnel that the wretched mosquito slayer forcefully created with the destructive vortex finally disappeared. The power of the great array of the 5 elements shifting technique, which reversed the universe, cancelled out the power of the destructive vortex's mental power in less than 10 seconds, and the gap was instantly repaired. At this point, the chaotic escape of all the warships trapped in this void cage had finally come to an end. There were still nearly 1,000 warships remaining within the range of the formation, struggling left and right like trapped beasts. Their cannons were firing wildly, but to no avail. They couldn't rush out at all, but there were still nearly 1,000 warships. The frequency was so fast that it caused the void to tremble violently at this moment. The Death Star vortex that was 100,000 kilometers away suddenly burst into a dazzling light, causing all the starry sky experts in the center of the void to subconsciously close their eyes at the same time. The next moment, when they opened their eyes again, the entire star field where the void cage was located was already empty. Everyone and everything within 100,000 kilometers of the void, including the erupting rare mineral deposits and nearly 1,000 warships, had completely disappeared without a trace. It was only at this moment that Huai Dongzi, who had been blasted out of the endless void by the wretched mosquito slayer, arrived. He saw that the formation had already completed its shift, but there were still nearly 100 warships of various forces in the void in the distance. Almost all of them were fortresses and small fortresses. Obviously, it was impossible to kill all of them. Chapter 3169. Translator. Nayerbo Studio Editor. Nayerbo Studio. Another egg. Whoosh. Rumble. Whoosh. The sound of the air breaking rang out densely, accompanied by some loud booming noises. This was already the interior of the Death Stellar vortex. No one knew what had happened to the void of the Death Stellar domain after the Heaven and Earth Reversal 5-element shifting technique had been fully activated and completed the shift. Everyone who had successfully escaped into the Death Star vortex, including Yi Xian, was not in the mood to think about what was happening outside. This was because they were still in danger and had no time to think about anything else. To be more precise, they had just escaped from a dragon's den, and now they had fallen into a tiger's den. Before they could recover, new trouble had already befallen them. From the outside, the Death Star vortex looked like a small black hole. It was for this reason that although many starry sky experts knew about this place, none of them had actually entered it, except for Tian Qianzi. Black holes were extremely dangerous. They could even swallow light, let alone other things. Therefore, no one would be so bored as to casually explore an unknown black hole. In fact, the inside of the Death Star vortex was not much different from an ordinary black hole. It was also a dark world. There was not even any light or heat. In a sense, the Death Star vortex was actually a black hole in the universe in another sense. They were essentially the same. Black holes were formed by the extreme collapse of the void after the Big Bang. They swallowed all light and heat, including light. As for the Death Star vortex, although it did not explode before it was formed, it contained a devouring marrow essence that could devour all light, heat, and light. Therefore, its meaning and essence was not much different from a black hole. The only difference was that all the light and heat, as well as the energy of the universe, were being devoured by the Death Star vortex. They were all converging in one place, which was the deepest core of the Death Star vortex. There was a giant crystal egg there. It was also the place where Tian Qianzi's strongest devouring doppelganger was born. At this moment, the scene inside the Death Star vortex had already stunned all the starry sky experts who had escaped into this place, including Yi Xian. Apart from Yi Xian's Dongshu shuttle, which was only a small private battleship, the rest of the spaceships were at least 10,000 meters in diameter. There were 7 large fortresses, 5 small cosmic-level fortresses, and 300,000-meter-wide cosmic fortresses. In total, there were 15 giant battleships. Among them, there were 3 universal fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters. One of them belonged to the Tianji race, while the other 2 belonged to 2 of the races of the Second Universe Federation. The other 12 big fortresses and small strongholds belonged to different races in the Second Universe. The giant battleships that entered the Death Star vortex belonged to different powers. No 2 belonged to the same power. The 3 universal fortresses were overseen by existences at the 12th level, the Void Realm. Even the upper echelon of the Heaven's Legacy race's fortress was the same. The strongest expert of the Heaven's Legacy race stationed in the Death Star vortex was also a supreme existence at the 14th level, the Cosmic Light Realm. However, that existence was in another universal fortress of the Heaven's Legacy race. At this moment, he had been teleported to the core-killing array of the 6th palace of the 10 ultimate celestial palaces in the human clan's camp by the great technique of 5 elements reversal. Right now, the 15 giant battleships of various powers and Yi Xian's small private battleship, Dongshu shuttle, were in different areas. After entering the Death Star vortex, they did not gather in the same area. However, all the battleships were moving toward the same target at full speed. There was a giant crystal egg there. Although it was called giant, it was only relative to the material it was made of. In fact, this giant crystal egg was not very big. It was only about 3 meters tall. However, its entire body was formed by the devouring source crystal. Moreover, it was completely natural. There was not the slightest gap in between. It was clearly a whole. That was why it was said to be a giant egg. After all, most devouring source crystals were the size of a pigeon's egg. It was difficult for this kind of mysterious crystal to continue accumulating to a larger size after reaching the size of a pigeon's egg. The reason why this giant crystal egg was so huge was naturally because it had devoured all the energy, light, and heat in the entire Death Star vortex. The devouring marrow essence was only the size of a nascent soul's fist. It was planted in the core of a star by Tian Qianzi. Since then it had triggered a great change that lasted thousands of years. An entire Death Star vortex had become a sacrifice. Countless stars had perished. The price of death had created this giant devouring marrow essence, as well as a large number of rare crystals and devouring source crystals that were subsidiary products in the Death Star vortex. In addition to this giant devouring marrow essence, there were also a large number of rare minerals and devouring source crystals in the Death Star vortex. The energy, light, and heat of the entire Death Star vortex had all been absorbed into the Death Star vortex. Coupled with the power of the devouring marrow essence, it was not surprising that so many rare crystals were produced in the Death Star vortex. If not for this, the previous eruption would not have happened. Now the dozen or so holes in the Death Star vortex had healed on their own. The eruption of the Death Star vortex had stopped, but the large number of crystals in the Death Star vortex still remained. The moment Yi Xian's Dongshu shuttle entered, it immediately unleashed its maximum speed and absorbed the crystals with all its might. The large number of crystals were like a surging torrent, like rivers flowing into the sea, as they were absorbed by the Dongshu shuttle. Although the interior of the Dongshu shuttle used the space folding technique, it was still unable to withstand the influx of so many rare crystals. The only reason it did not explode was because Yi Xian was also absorbing them with all his might. All the rare minerals and crystals that entered the Dongshu shuttle were all absorbed into the undying world within his body. During this process, an equal amount of rare minerals and crystals entered the Dongshu shuttle, which were then absorbed by Yi Xian. This cycle repeated endlessly. In less than a minute, 60 to 70% of the rare minerals and devourer source crystals that were suspended in the void of the Death Star vortex had been absorbed by him. Immediately after, the 15 battleships of the major forces that had followed the Dongshu shuttle into the Death Star vortex finally regained their senses. Like madmen, they began to plunder all the rare minerals and devourer source crystals in the void of the Death Star vortex, just like Yi Xian's Dongshu shuttle. Another 2 minutes passed, and the remaining 40% of the resources were divided among all the battleships. Among them, nearly 10% fell into Yi Xian's pocket. Up to this point, from the moment they entered the Death Star vortex until now, 70% of all the subsidiary resources in the Death Star vortex had been taken by Yi Xian alone, while the 15 battleships of the other forces only received about 30%. Chapter 3170. Merciless deprivation. Although the Dongshu shuttle was fast, it was not fully activated at this moment. Yi Xian was still busy collecting all kinds of rare minerals and devouring origin crystals that filled the cabins of the spaceship. As for the other 15 spaceships, due to their slower reaction speed, they had only collected about 30% of the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals in the Death Star vortex. Although the Death Star vortex was vast, the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals inside it were not as full as the sea. Therefore, although the 30% was more than the total amount that had erupted outside, it was actually not a lot. At the very least, when divided among the 15 spaceships, it was not enough to fill the cabins of the spaceships. Therefore, the Starry Sky experts in the 3 Starry Sky fortresses did not have to be busy collecting the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals in the cabins of the spaceships into their storage spaces or magical treasures, because their cabins were full like Yi Xian. After collecting all the rare minerals and devouring origin crystals in the Death Star vortex, they immediately focused on the giant egg, in the depths of the Death Star vortex in the distance. The 15 spaceships of various sizes all rushed forward at their maximum speed. In less than 10 seconds, the 15 spaceships of various sizes all overtook the Dongshu shuttle and rushed forward. The fastest 3 Starry Sky fortresses were now less than 100 kilometers away from the giant crystal egg. 100 kilometers might be a decent distance on land, especially for ordinary creatures, but in the void of the Milky Way it was really nothing. Especially in this environment that was like a black hole, the sense of distance was really weakened too much. For the starry sky fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters, it was even more negligible. It could be said that the 3 starry sky fortresses were completely in front of the giant crystal egg and were almost touching it. It was also at this moment that an unexpected change occurred. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion suddenly sounded. The giant crystal egg, which was about 100 meters in size, suddenly exploded at this moment without any warning. The oval-shaped egg instantly cracked into countless small pieces. The entire egg was formed from the devouring source crystal. It was originally a devouring marrow essence that had devoured the void energy of the entire Death Star field, as well as the light and heat of all the stars. It had taken thousands of years for it to grow to this day and become this huge egg. Now that it had exploded, it was clear that the being nurtured in the giant egg had matured. All the essence of the devouring marrow essence had been gathered into the being nurtured in the giant egg. What had exploded was just an ordinary devouring origin crystal. Although the devourer source crystal was also a precious treasure, it was an important strategic resource for all the forces in the 3 universes. Its specific use to these forces was still unknown, but it could be seen from the fact that they were so eager to send large fleets to the Death Star field. At this moment, after the giant egg exploded, everyone ignored the devouring source crystal that was flying in all directions. On one hand, it was because they had already collected a lot of devouring source crystals, but more importantly, what they were truly concerned about was the being nurtured in the giant crystal egg. To be able to be nurtured in such a huge devouring source crystal, and even the formation of the entire Death Star field, and the entire Death Star field at such a huge cost and shocking expense, what kind of being was being nurtured in the giant egg? The moment they saw the giant crystal egg, everyone had been blinded by the huge greed in their hearts, and did not realize that it could actually be extremely dangerous. At this moment, when the giant crystal egg suddenly exploded, everyone's attention was drawn to everything inside the giant egg, and they did not have time to pay attention to anything else. Therefore, when the crystal body emitted a dazzling light, as if a perfect human body sculpted from the devouring source crystal was revealed, everyone, including Yi Xian who was far behind, opened their mouths wide, as if they had been struck by lightning. For a short period of time they did not have any other reaction, and their minds were in chaos. At this moment a terrible crisis descended. An extremely powerful suction force suddenly appeared from the crystal body that had appeared in the giant egg. Although it was invisible, it was more powerful than the suction force of an ordinary black hole. In an instant, the 3 starry sky fortresses closest to him with a diameter of 100,000 meters were sucked in and stopped in their tracks. However, this was only the beginning. This mysterious crystal body was like a terrifying beast that had just been born. As soon as it hatched from the giant crystal egg, its first thought was to eat. As an existence born from the devouring marrow essence, although the strand of Tian Chenzi's self-destructing remnant soul that had entered his body had yet to gain control of the entire body, just the attribute instinct of this crystalline body had already determined that there could only be one way for it to eat. And that was to devour. It was just like how the devouring marrow essence had absorbed the energy of the void, and the light and heat of countless stars in the process of nurturing him. It had even turned an entire vast star region into a land of death as it devoured everything. Domineering. Violent. The merciless plundering of red fruits. Boom. Boom. Without any suspense, the 3 starry sky fortresses closest to the crystal body exploded in an instant. All the starry sky experts and resources in the fortresses were exposed to the dark void inside the Death Star vortex. In an instant, they withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Including the various resources in the fortresses, including all the starry sky experts who had been caught off guard and were now in a panic. Immediately after, the other 12 smaller fortresses and 10,000 meters large fortresses behind the 3 starry sky fortresses also followed in the same footsteps without any suspense. A series of loud explosions rang out. Strangely, although such huge fortresses and starry sky fortresses had completely disintegrated and exploded, none of them showed the flames that should have been there. It was as if they had all been forcibly pulled apart by an invisible and strange force, causing them to disintegrate in an instant. At the same time, all the resources and starry sky experts in the 12 smaller fortresses that had exploded, just like the 3 fortresses that had been destroyed half a second ago. All the resources and starry sky experts quickly withered and withered. The extracted energy turned into an invisible storm and poured into the crystal body that still had its eyes closed and seemed to have no consciousness at all. It seemed to be devouring everything. Seeing this scene, Yixian's expression changed drastically. A sense of crisis that he had never felt before suddenly descended upon him and completely enveloped his entire body and mind. Chapter 3171. Translator. Nyobo Studio Editor. Nyobo Studio descend of the ladle sovereign Yixian's entire body sank to the bottom of the valley with the arrival of danger. The crystalline body in the depths of the Death Star vortex was simply too bizarre. The formless suction force emanating from it was so terrifying that even a fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters was torn apart by it. On the other hand, the reason why Yixian's Dongshu shuttle was still alive and didn't suffer the same calamity was because it was the furthest away, and was left behind by the 15 fortresses and strongholds. The terrifying devouring force emitted by the crystal body had already been weakened by a lot by the time it reached this side. On the other hand, it was because the Void Hole shuttle was, after all, an epic-grade battleship. It had been fused with by Yixian 6 times, and it had even used up a wormhole ship that was made from special materials to be able to jump through wormholes in the universe. In terms of attack power, it might not be comparable to the terrifying Starry Sky Fortress, but in terms of strength it was definitely comparable. Even so, the Dongshu shuttle was still trembling violently, and looked like it could completely disintegrate at any time. Since you've damaged this prince's treasure ship, this matter is not over. Yixian gritted his teeth and took a step forward without hesitation. At the same time, he waved his hand and stored the Dongshu shuttle into his undying world. This battleship was the crystallization of his blood, sweat, and tears. Some of the similar battleships fused with it were even obtained by chance. Even the current Yixian might not be able to reforge a new battleship, so he didn't dare to take the risk. Although stepping out of the Dongshu shuttle was equivalent to exposing himself to the terrifying suction force, Yixian was certain that with the headless infant corpse around, it wouldn't sit idly by and watch him die. However, the same couldn't be said for the Dongshu shuttle. What surprised him was that after he stepped out of the Dongshu shuttle and stored it into his undying world, his body was exposed to the inner void of the Death Star vortex without any protection. However, Yixian didn't feel the slightest bit of suction force. It was as if the formless suction force was only effective against battleships. But this was obviously impossible. The Starry Sky powerhouses who fell out of the 15 fortresses and fortresses in the void ahead were clearly rapidly withering. Some of the weaker existences had already become withered corpses at this moment. Floating in the void, all signs of life were gone. But Yixian was completely unscathed, making him an exception. He was baffled and stunned for a moment. In the next moment, Yixian suddenly felt a slight tremor in his sea of consciousness. A ray of light whizzed out from between his eyebrows. As it floated above his head, an invisible and mysterious aura poured out from it. This was also a type of power. Although Yixian couldn't understand it, he could feel it. This was because this mysterious aura had long since become extremely dense in his sea of consciousness. That was the result of the accumulation of the void essence crystals over time. But at this moment, the void essence crystal floating above his head was unusually generous. The mysterious aura pouring out from within the crystal was like a gushing spring, transforming into a formless waterfall that enveloped Yixian and protected him completely. At this moment, Yixian finally understood why he didn't feel the terrifying suction force from the crystal body. That force had been blocked by the mysterious aura of the void essence crystal. The void essence crystal was formed when an entire universe plane expanded to its limit and headed towards destruction, turning into a universe black hole. Then it condensed to its limit. When it condensed to its limit, a big explosion would occur. At that time it would expand again, and this cycle would repeat just like the reincarnation of life. The void essence crystal was the essence core of the void essence crystal that Yixian had obtained. To it, all forces related to the laws of the universe's void should be able to ignore them. The void essence crystal itself was the embodiment of the extreme condensation of a universe plane. Even the devouring system couldn't detect the mysterious aura emitted from the void essence crystal. Even if it came into contact with it, it still couldn't analyze its attributes, power, and other characteristics. Just this alone was enough to show how high-end the void essence crystal was. Naturally, it could block the suction force from the crystal body. After all, the crystal body was formed by plundering the void power of an entire star field. This kind of power couldn't affect the void essence crystal, and even the subsidiary product of the formation of the void essence crystal, the void soldier ladle. Whoosh! Screech! Almost in the next second, a black ray of light suddenly shot out from the void essence crystal floating above Yi Xian's head. It expanded in the wind, and at the same time it let out a screech. An extremely powerful and terrifying aura instantly became fierce, affecting a part of the void. With a trembling sound, it rushed towards the crystal body in front of it. It was the venerable void ladle that Yi Xian had captured and taken away by the void essence crystal when he was challenging the void inheritance tower. Previously, in the void inheritance tower, this void ladle was only in its energy form. Its body was extremely huge, about 50,000 feet long, which was equivalent to 15,000 meters, which was much larger than a star fortress with a diameter of 10,000 meters. There were 9 golden horns on its back. Together with the bigger one on its head, there were 10 golden horns in total, 1 big and 9 small. Now its body was much smaller. It was only about 10,000 meters long, which was 3,000 meters long. However, it was no longer in the form of energy but a real body. Obviously, this was the result of swallowing the essence crystal and absorbing it into his body. Then he used his own strength to condense this body. If a flesh and blood body could be reconstructed, then this kind of crystalline existence was between a living and non-living body. Condensing a solid body wasn't difficult at all. Although it had shrunk, it should be able to continue growing. However, its power was obviously weakened by too much. When they were in the void inheritance tower, the venerable void ladle was 15,000 meters long. Although it was not the supreme desolation, it should be in existence of that level. However, after condensing a real body, the pressure emitted by the venerable void ladle was obviously much weaker. It gave Yi Xian the feeling that it was only slightly stronger than Long Ziwen and Huai Dongzi. It should be between the 14th level, Cosmic Light, and the 15th level, Qiankuan. Although it was weaker, it was not like the desolation demonic dragon that was taken away by the headless infant corpse because it was still in the form of energy. Every time it arrived, it would consume a lot of energy. One day, it would completely dissipate due to the exhaustion of its energy. In just 10 seconds, the venerable void ladle had crossed the endless void. Its speed was even more terrifying than that of a starry sky fortress with a diameter of 10,000 meters. When Yi Xian realized what was going on, it had already arrived in front of the crystal body. It was only 1,000 miles away. In front of them, a large number of withered corpses floated in the air. Some of them were still struggling on the brink of death. This was especially so for the 2 leaders of the Second Universe Federation who were in charge of the 3 interstellar fortresses, as well as the core member of the Tianji race. These 3 were all existences of the cosmic light realm. Although they could not resist the energy in their bodies being sucked away by the invisible suction force, they were not affected too much in the short term. At this moment they were rushing toward the crystal body trying to kill it. Chapter 3172. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The passage of time. Half-step universe realm? That's impossible. A void-swallowing beast? And it has a golden horn. This is clearly a void-swallowing beast venerable. How can there be such an existence in the 3rd universe? Long Xian. It must be him. What secrets does this guy have? How can he abduct a half-step universe realm void-swallowing beast venerable from the 1st universe of the Heavenly Legacy clan? When they turned around, they saw the figure of Senior Void Ladle in the air. The 3 top powerhouses who were pouncing toward the crystal body exclaimed in shock. The auras emanating from the bodies of these 3 existences were all at the cosmic light realm. Of the 2 giants from the Federation of the 2nd universe, one of them was a master from the G clan. He had a human-like body and a pair of giant G clan wings on his back. Silver light flowed out of them, and they were extremely dazzling. It faintly emitted a cold metallic texture. The other one was extremely tall and looked like a giant. He was about 30 meters tall and looked like a human bear. However, he had no hair on his body. His skin was wrinkled like the bark of a 100-year-old tree. It was extremely dry and looked like a giant bark monster. As for the core leader of the Heavenly Legacy clan, his real body couldn't be seen at all. His entire body was covered by a purple combat suit. Combat suits were very common in the third universe of the human race's technology camp. If a battleship was said to be a means of transportation and a weapon for long-range attacks, then a battle mech would be a well-deserved melee heavy mech. A good combat suit could not only merge with the controller's armor, but also greatly increase the controller's defense and attack index. It could even reach a level higher than the controller's. However, in the human race's technological camp, due to the cultivation camp's refining technology, the majority of the human race's experts preferred lightweight battle armor. Therefore, although the human race also had battle armor, they were not very enthusiastic about this aspect of research. The battle armor that they produced was far inferior to that of the Tianji clan's battle armor. The cultivation base of this Tianji clan member, who had appeared in a combat mecha, was only around the middle stage of the cosmic light realm after merging with the mecha. However, this combat mecha was actually able to resist the invisible devouring power of the crystal body without being damaged in the slightest. This was enough to show its grade. It should be the kind of top-quality combat suit that could allow the controller to exert the combat power of a level higher than the controller's. If that was the case, then the master of the Heavenly Legacy clan in the combat suit should be in the 13th level of the Genesis realm. He hadn't entered the cosmic light realm yet. Screech! Just as these three giants, who all had the battle prowess of the cosmic light realm, exclaimed in shock, the Void Ladle, who had already arrived in front of them, roared again. Its huge body, which was thousands of feet long, was like a black mountain. Without any hesitation, it directly pressed down with a rumble. Its target wasn't the crystalline body, but the three cosmic light realm masters, including the Silver Wing Ji-Ran. Damn it! What does it want? You dare attack us? Can't you see the situation clearly? Whoosh 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 whoosh. This scene made the three cosmic light powerhouses roar in anger. At the same time, they stopped and turned around to attack Void Revered Ladle, forming a joint attack with great tacit understanding. Half-step universe realm experts were existences that had already surpassed the perfection stage of the 9th rank of the cosmic realm, and they'd stepped foot into the 15th rank step by step, causing them to be far from being able to go against them. Countless black vines instantly sprang out of the old demon's body. Each of them was a meter in diameter. Not only were they all as agile as snakes, but they also circled in the void as soon as they rushed out. They were like silk being peeled from a cocoon. They were endless. In the blink of an eye, they interweaved into a giant hammer that was 1,000 feet long in the void above his head. Like a meteor, it rapidly smashed toward the falling Lord Ladle in the void. At the same time, the wings on the back of the Silver Wing Ji-Run flapped slightly, and his figure disappeared in an instant. The laws of the void in this Death Star vortex were already in chaos, making it impossible to teleport. Even warships could not perform space jumps. At this moment, his figure had disappeared in the blink of an eye, a sign that his speed had reached the limit. When he reappeared, he was already on top of Lord Ladle's back. The silver wings on his back flapped, and silver light flowed and swooshed, splitting the void. Like two unparalleled sharp blades, they slashed toward Lord Ladle at the same time. As for the purple mecha that housed the Tianji clan's upper echelon, at this moment, with a hum, a layer of dark purple energy shield instantly appeared on the surface of the Tenjong Tal mecha. At the same time, the mecha's figure also rushed into the sky, punching out with a simple fist, but at this moment, its massive right fist was completely enveloped by a black sphere of about 1 meter in size. It was clearly antimatter energy. This punch was like a mini death ray cannon. It was indestructible. All matter and energy would be melted away under the impact of the antimatter death ray. Even the Void Soldier Ladle clan, who was known to have the strongest crystal body, could not resist it. This punch could at least blow a hole in Lord Ladle's body. Boom! Old Monster Bark's giant vine fist slammed into Void Lord Ladle's abdomen with a deafening roar, but it unexpectedly exploded. The only effect it had was to slightly slow down Lord Ladle's falling momentum. However, Old Monster Bark opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of green liquid. This was the backlash from the destruction of a large number of vines. A single punch had caused him to suffer internal injuries. At this moment, a black light flashed beside him. The crystal body that had just opened its eyes suddenly appeared in front of Old Monster Bark in the blink of an eye. It raised its hand and directly stabbed into the back of Old Monster Bark's head. As if it was absorbing and devouring, Old Monster Bark's huge body withered visibly. In less than a breath, he had become dispirited. Not good. This crystal monster has awakened. Screech! On the ladle's back, Silverwing Ji-Ren's expression changed as he cried out in alarm. Before he finished speaking, Lord Ladle, who had risen up again, had already made his move. The 9 golden edges on the ladle's back sprang up at the same time and intertwined and danced in the void at an extremely fast speed. The entire void was instantly filled with cracks. It was like a piece of tofu that was being cut by 9 sharp blades at a high frequency. It was completely chaotic. This kind of secret space technique was extremely strange. Silverwing Ji-Ren's body was instantly filled with countless space cracks, and the chaotic aura of space turbulence emitted from them made his expression change. His body came to an abrupt halt, and he did not dare to move an inch. Otherwise, once he was sucked in, it would be difficult for him to return. In the blink of an eye, venerated Void Ladle and the crystal body had each taken care of a cosmic realm elite. Only the high-ranking member of the Tianji clan who was piloting the mecha remained unscathed. However, his punch was destined to not be able to land on venerated Void Ladle's body. Venerated Void Ladle had already targeted the antimatter death ray energy ball the moment it appeared on the mecha's right fist. Hum! A violent buzzing sound rang out in the void. The giant golden horn on Lord Ladle's head suddenly trembled at a high frequency. This seemed to be a secret space technique that involved the law of the void. It should belong to the bloodline ability of the Ladle Voiders. It actually changed its position in an instant. Chapter 3173. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Hitting a cow through a mountain. Space law divine ability? How is this possible? He's only a half-step Qingquan realm. Inside the purple mecha, the Tianji clan's higher-ups exclaimed in shock. The entire mech turned around inexplicably. Its original form rose up and extended its arms to punch above its head. Strangely, its body flew horizontally, and its fist smashed towards the crystal body on the other side. This scene was too strange, and the key was that there were no traces to follow. As the person involved, he didn't even know how this change happened. He didn't feel the slightest bit. Other than the space law level divine ability, there was no other explanation. As for the power of the laws of the universe, it was clearly a domain that only the mighty figures of the 15th realm, the universe realm, had the qualifications to slightly touch upon. In fact, most of the mighty figures of the universe realm might not really touch upon the power of the laws of the universe. This required insight and opportunity. Venerated Void Ladle was only a half-step Qingquan realm powerhouse. It was impossible for him to use the divine ability of the universe's laws. He did not know that venerated Void Ladle's original body in the Eldritch era was a terrifying existence that was second only to the primordial supreme. Although the Tower of Antiquity had only left behind 30% of the bloodline inheritance of those terrifying beings from the Eldritch era. Even so, with the level of venerated Void Ladle's original body, even 30% of the inheritance was enough for him to touch the power of the universe's laws. Boom! Before the purple mecha's death ray fist landed, a loud explosion came from the space above venerated Void Ladle's back. The void, which had been torn apart by the 9 golden edges on the back of the ladle and was full of cracks, finally collapsed completely. The large area, about a few miles in size, instantly turned into a small black hole. Before the Silverwing Ji people in this area could react, their bodies had been swallowed, and they were sucked into the void turbulence inside the black hole. Even if they did not die, it was like eternal exile. In any case, they would never come back. At the same time, Yi Xian, who was rushing at full speed from behind, finally arrived. He shouted at venerated Void Ladle, who was falling down. "Are you a violent maniac? What other tricks can you use other than pressure? That crystal body is still useful. Besides, the purple mecha is also mine. The guy inside doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. Just don't break the mecha." Venerated Void Ladle obviously did not understand these words, but its crystal body was refined from the void marrow crystal. At this moment, the crystal was like a signal relay station. Yixian's words were immediately transmitted through the marrow crystal, and received by venerated void marrow crystal. Its body came to an abrupt halt as it hovered in midair like a giant mountain, right above the purple mecha and the crystalline body. In the next moment, the high-frequency vibration of the giant golden horn on top of the Void Ladle Senior's head suddenly changed, and the rapid buzzing sound in the void instantly became heavy and solid like the beating of a drum. This must be another Weapon Ladle bloodline ability that touched upon the power of the universe's space law. If the previous ability was called Stellar Transposition, then the weapon ladle that venerated Void Ladle used now could be called Hitting a Bull Through a Mountain. This was because the purple mecha, which had just stabilized itself under the effect of the stellar transposition, suddenly shuddered and then became completely still. The antimatter death ray ball on its right fist also disappeared, and its 10 feet tall figure was suspended in the void like a statue. If there were no accidents, the Tianji clan's higher-ups in the mecha had already fallen the moment the purple mecha trembled. They were killed on the spot, but the mecha was undamaged. This was also the power of the universe's space law. Venerated Void Ladle was originally a half-step universe realm expert, and it used its bloodline ability to borrow the power of the void to form a powerful shockwave attack. The Tianji clan's higher-ups in the mecha were only at the Genesis realm. They were almost 2 realms weaker than the purple mecha, so it was natural that they would die in one hit. In fact, Yixian had already seen this kind of attack before. It was in the black hole of the first universe. At that time, the Void Ladle's sovereign, whose body was as large as a mountain, was at least 1,000 miles away from Yixian and Ba Chai. Suddenly, the Void Ladle's sovereign, whose body was as large as a mountain, let out a shrill cry without warning. Its power was so terrifying that the huge black hole of the void was shaken. In an instant, the sound of rolling thunder resounded, covering the sky and earth as it swept over. Using the sound as a guide, it instantly drew upon the power of the void in the huge black hole area, turning it into a cage that crushed from all directions. This kind of void cage could only be considered a secret technique. It was not a divine ability, and it did not touch upon the true universe's space law. However, it was also an inheritance of the Weapon Ladle race's bloodline. Although the void weapon ladles were not living beings, and even if they were, the nest of weapon ladles in the black hole of life had nothing to do with that one from the primordial era. The weapon ladles were a subsidiary product of the formation of the Void Marrow Mother. The weapon ladles born from different Void Marrow Mothers were not related to each other. However, the essence of the Void Marrow Mother was the same. Although their levels might be different, they were the reincarnation products of the extreme contraction and expansion of different universe planes. The magnitude of their power depended on the scale of the universe plane. Their formation embodied the essence of the universe's space law. Therefore, whether they were from the same nest or not, when they grew to a certain height, they would be able to comprehend some of the universe's space law. Like the bloodline inheritance of living beings, it would never be broken. Yixian had already vaguely guessed this. Therefore, when he saw that the high-ranking member of the Tianji clan being shocked to death by this seemingly familiar divine ability, he was stunned for a moment before he quickly understood. F***CK. With a raise of his hand the stars move, and with a flip of his hand he can hit a cow through a mountain. In the blink of an eye, 2 divine abilities related to the power of the void have appeared. TSK amazing. As he muttered to himself, Yixian couldn't help but show a hint of envy on his face. Anyone who saw these 2 divine abilities would be jealous. Although he couldn't communicate with the weapon ladles directly, and the Void Marrow Crystal as a transfer station didn't pay much attention to him, Yixian didn't intend to give up. At this time he was already thinking about it and he would think of a way later. After throwing away this thought, Yixian immediately turned his head to look at the crystal body standing in the void not far away. The crystal body had just absorbed all the vitality and power of a cosmic light realm master, and now it had closed its eyes again, as if it was digesting it silently. However, this digesting process was obviously very fast. Just as Yixian turned his head to look, the crystal body that had closed its eyes for a few seconds had opened them again. This time, the confusion in its eyes had disappeared by more than half, replaced by a strong sense of resentment and killing intent. Chapter 3174. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Big tongue. Before the other party could finish speaking, Yixian heard the familiar sound of a system notification in his mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host. Innate treasure body discovered. Attribute: innate energy crystal form. Grade: perfect pure grade. Grade: innate defective grade. Status: consciousness has taken over the body. Compatibility is insufficient. Fusion is incomplete. Ding! Congratulations to the host. The activation conditions for the doppelganger system have been met. Do you wish to activate it now? Ding! Congratulations to the host. If you choose to activate the doppelganger system with 3 subsidiary systems, the host system will reward you with a one-time success rate of 100%. Ding! Congratulations to the host. One after another, the system notifications rang in his mind. Yixian was stunned. He didn't pay much attention to the rest of the notifications. Fortunately, it didn't matter. He just had to check with the system later. At this moment, his entire body was enveloped by a huge surprise. He even felt like it was raining pies from the sky. Doppelganger system? Just the sound of it sounds awesome. Yixian had activated the fusion system and his personal star communication system twice before. Now that he had activated the doppelganger system, he had 3 subsidiary systems of the main doppelganger system, and all of them were extremely practical, especially important to Yixian. His luck was off the charts. The so-called doppelganger system was obviously a system ability that allowed Yixian to have a doppelganger system. Although Yixian had come into contact with a lot of doppelganger cultivation techniques before entering the starry sky, everything was reset after entering the starry sky. He couldn't use them now. Moreover, those cultivation techniques and doppelganger cultivation techniques were obviously of a lower level and might not be suitable for him to cultivate now. In the starry sky, all the laws were different. Previously, it was a small world. Now Yixian was in the endless starry sky. The level of the laws was at or near the peak. Therefore, he had never thought of cultivating a doppelganger before. He hadn't come across a suitable starry sky doppelganger cultivation technique, so it was a waste of time to think about it. But he never expected that he would be so lucky today and encounter a clone in the form of an innate energy crystal. He didn't even need to cultivate painstakingly anymore. According to the system, it seemed that as long as he placed a strand of his primordial spirit into it, he would be able to successfully possess an external incarnation. This was an innate treasure body that had been formed at the cost of the destruction of an entire vast star field. It was unknown how much energy had been consumed before the giant devouring source crystal egg had matured. If there was no accident, this should be the work of the palace master of the 6th absolute palace. Yixian had already guessed this when he heard the conversation between the wretched mosquito butcher and Tian Chanzi. Right now, the wisp of Tian Chanzi's primordial spirit that had escaped after exploding and rushed into the Death Star vortex should have already entered this innate treasure body. This was what the system meant when it said that the consciousness had entered the body. However, although Tian Chanzi's Yuan spirit had already entered, due to the lack of compatibility, he had not completely fused with it. In other words, this innate treasure body was not his yet. If others wanted to snatch it, there was still a chance of success. This was especially true for Yixian. After activating 3 subsidiary systems, the main devouring system had actually rewarded him with a 100% success rate of forcible devouring. This was simply helping him cheat. With this reward, Yixian could directly forcibly devour the other party and pull them into the devouring space in his body, which was today's undying world. At that time, with the help of the devouring system and the headless infant corpse, there was no need to be afraid that they would not be able to kill the wisp of Tian Chanzi's primordial spirit. If he wanted Yixian to do this, he really didn't have the ability. However, this biggest problem had already been solved before he had the time to worry about it. What was there to hesitate about in this situation? With this in mind, Yixian immediately ordered the devouring system to immediately activate the subsidiary doppelganger system. At the same time, he proposed to receive the opportunity to forcibly devour as a reward. As for the target, it was naturally the innate treasure body that had not yet finished speaking. As soon as he replied, the result of the system notification rang in Yixian's mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host. The doppelganger system has been successfully activated. Current level. Level 1. Number of doppelgangers available at the current level. 1. Ding! Congratulations to the host. 3 subsidiary systems have been successfully activated. System reward. 1 forcible devour with a 100% success rate. Confirmed to be used immediately. Target confirmed. Adjusting the system's energy. Progress 1. He actually wanted to adjust the system's energy? It seemed that the 100% success rate of forcible devouring was not given for free. Wasn't the system's energy the same as Yixian's resources? The devouring system had already fused with him. All the energy required to maintain the system's operation was provided by Yixian. Wool comes from a sheep's back. All the resources obtained in the undying world could be used by the system at any time. Yixian did not care about it. This time he was going to have to bleed a lot. Fortunately, the harvest was huge, so it was acceptable. At this moment, the innate treasure body standing in the void opposite him finished speaking. However, in the end he stuttered for a long time. He was so anxious that his neck seemed to have become thicker. However, he could not squeeze out the rest of his words. Seeing this, Yixian was instantly delighted. This was the side effect of an incomplete fusion. He could not even straighten his tongue. Haste makes waste. In such a good mood, Yixian's evil sense of humor suddenly appeared. He grinned and laughed at the innate treasure body opposite him. He continued the other party's words. I am Big Tongue. I am 7 kills deity. Tianqianzi's avatar, who had already taken control of his innate treasure body, had almost exploded from anger. As he roared, his tongue actually became even more uncontrollable. His body swayed twice, and he almost fell into the void. In the next moment, the system notification sounded in Yixian's mind again. Ding! Energy adjustment complete. Target locked. Forcible devouring activated. Whoosh! A faintly discernible sound of something breaking through the air rang out. The innate treasure body in front of him, which was still in a rage, disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was forcefully devoured by the system, and pulled into the undying world within Yixian's body. Yixian still couldn't understand this method, but there was a reason for everything. He believed that one day, he would be able to fully comprehend everything. Of course, that would only be possible when Yixian grew up in the starry sky environment and reached a very high level. Now, as the innate treasure body was successfully devoured by the system, Yixian's heart suddenly relaxed. A thought flashed through his mind and his face immediately froze. Big Tongue? It couldn't be so coincidental, right? If he remembered correctly, the system's first few notifications seemed to have said that this innate treasure body's grade was perfect and pure. If that was the case, what the hell was the evaluation of its grade being innately defective? It was already perfect and pure but innately defective? This was illogical. Could it be that this innate treasure body that walked out of the giant egg that devoured origin crystals had not fully matured? Could it be that the primordial spirit of Tianqianzi's primordial spirit had self-destructed because the Death Star vortex had been discovered? Could it be that it had no choice but to mature prematurely and enter the innate treasure body? Chapter 3175. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation sent to the Inheritance Tower. Although he had obtained the innate treasure body, there was still a wisp of Tianqianzi's primordial spirit in it. He had to get it out first before Yixian could proceed with his first outer body incarnation. He did not intend to intervene in this matter, so he directly gave instructions to the devouring system. At the same time, he tried to communicate with the corpse lamp tattoo on his left chest, but there was still no response, so he could only give up. Fortunately, after receiving Yixian's instructions, the system did not send a warning tone. It must be dealing with this matter and should be able to succeed. Yixian was relieved. Taking advantage of this time, he could clean up the mess in front of him. Thinking of this, Yixian turned his head and scanned the surrounding void. The entire space within the vast vortex of stars was now deathly silent. Not only was the innate treasure body gone, one of the 3 fellows with cosmic light realm battle prowess had been banished into the turbulent streams of space, one had been turned into a withered corpse, and the last high-ranking member of the Tianji clan had been struck with a stick, directly falling into the enormous purple mecha. The 15 fortresses and fortresses that had rushed into the Death Star vortex were all disintegrated. The resources and the energy contained in some of the treasures were all sucked away. The starry sky masters who fell out of the fortresses, without exception, were all withered corpses. Even the fragments of the giant egg that had exploded and the devouring source crystals that had fallen from the 15 fortresses and strongholds had all disappeared. This kind of highly pure energy, after being absorbed, was gone without a trace, leaving nothing behind. The devouring power before was too terrifying. It was probably not used in a normal state, just like the first cry of a newborn baby, which was always louder. After Yixian took over the innate treasure body, he might not be so powerful when he used this kind of talent. At this moment, as far as the eye could see, there were ruins of fortresses and floating corpses everywhere. It was a shocking sight. It was a mess. At this time, Senior Void Ladle had returned and once again drilled into the Void Marrow crystal. As for the latter, it immediately turned into a ray of light and flashed through the top of Yixian's head and entered his sea of consciousness. As expected of the innate treasure body that was nurtured from the origin of devouring. Its appetite is really big. This kind of devouring power should be some kind of divine ability that originated from the same source as the treasure body. It will be mine soon. As he muttered to himself, Yixian grew excited once more. He turned to look at the purple mecha hovering silently in the air. He was also very interested in this mecha. Even the 3 starry sky fortresses with a diameter of 100,000 meters had collapsed under the terrifying devouring power of the innate treasure body. Even the Dongshu shuttles, which were already epic-grade starry sky treasure ships, couldn't withstand it. However, after the high-level member of the Tianji clan fell out of the silver fortress and lay in this purple mecha, which was not far away from the innate treasure body, he was safe and sound. The mecha was not damaged at all, which showed its quality. Yixian didn't like mechas, but since it was a rare and good thing, he couldn't let it go easily. It would be good to keep it and play with it when he had nothing to do. Besides, if he could use it to fuse with his indestructible glass armor for the 6th time, there might be unexpected surprises. Of course, the mecha had not been appraised yet. Yixian was just thinking about it. He would do it later. Very quickly, after circling around the enormous mecha more than a dozen times, Yixian finally saw through some tricks. After tossing and turning for a while, he opened the entrance and pulled out the upper echelons of the Heavenly Fate clan, who were no longer breathing and had probably been damaged by the shock. He originally wanted to throw it away, but this guy was a middle-aged man with a rather hateful appearance and shifty eyes. Yixian was unhappy just looking at him. However, this was a high-level member of the Tianji clan after all. He was at least a Genesis realm cultivator. Moreover, he was a mecha, so he could still use it. However, it was hard to say whether he would still have the same consciousness after changing the innate treasure body. At the very least, he could still remove the parts and continue to use them. How could the body parts of a mecha at the 14th stage of the Genesis realm be ordinary? Thinking of this, Yixian immediately changed his mind. He threw the mecha into the undying world inside his body, and lay down in an inconspicuous corner to kiss the earth. Then, he began to study the ownerless purple mecha in front of him. Although Yixian didn't know the name of the mecha, he didn't care. Who knows, he might just merge it with the indestructible glass armor later. After studying it for half a day, he still couldn't figure out how to operate it. Moreover, the devouring system was obviously busy dealing with Tian Qianzi's Yuanshan inside the innate sky treasure. It didn't have the time to answer Yixian's questions, nor was it convenient for him to ask. Therefore, after a fruitless search, Yixian simply waved his hand and stored the mecha into his undying world. At this point, there was no need to stay in the Death Star vortex anymore. It was time to rush out and return to Planet Victorious Return. However, this Death Star vortex was like a black hole. It was easy to enter, but there was no way out. They could only find some void passage similar to a natural wormhole to escape. Just as Yixian was about to take out the Dongshu shuttle and look around to see if he could find the exit, the system's notification sounded in his mind again. The surprise came too quickly. The Yuan Shun inside the innate sky treasure was finally forced out. However, the system couldn't erase it. After all, it was the Yuan Shun of a universe realm master. Throw it into the Tower of Desolation, directly to the 9th floor. After thinking for a while, Yixian immediately made a decision and issued a new order to the system. The Tower of Desolation recognized Yixian as its master and had been refined. Now it was suspended in the air above Yixian's mind. Although the devouring system, including Yixian, couldn't use its power because it was sealed, it was still possible to throw things into it. The 9th floor was a big scene. There were supreme beings at the level of Desolation Supreme, and the giant eye of the Desolation Heavenly Way. Even a Universe Realm Master would be like an ant if thrown in. Tian Qianzi didn't know what was good for him. He actually said that he wanted to take his head. Now Yixian gave him a wisp of his Yuan Shan to show his attitude. It was a slap in the face. As a result, following Yixian's order, Tian Qianzi's primordial spirit within the innate heavenly treasure was immediately expelled. Immediately after, within the 9th floor of the ancient desolate inheritance tower, incomparably mournful screams suddenly sounded out. They actually resounded endlessly, and even the tone of their voices changed. Those who didn't know better would think that some little girl was being ravaged and howled endlessly. Unfortunately, Yixian couldn't hear it. At this moment, he was asking the devouring system about the doppelganger system. Since the innate sky treasure was settled, he wasn't in a hurry to leave. This place was quiet and no one would bother to rush into the Death Star vortex. He could use this place to cultivate in seclusion and create his first outer body incarnation.